I was the only one who didn't go home for winter break, and I didn't realize how loud a building could be until it was empty. During finals week, the dorm felt like a beehive. Doors slamming, laughter bouncing off cinder block walls, someone blasting music through a shower speaker at midnight. Then, the last weekend, before the holidays came, and the sound drained out of the place like water down a sink. Suitcases thumped down the stairwells. The RA's voice echoed as she wished everyone safe travels. A few parents hugged their kids in the lobby, like the building was an airport gate. By Sunday night, the vending machines were the only things that still hummed with purpose. The heat kicked on and off in long, tired breaths, and every time it did, the radiators pinged like someone tapping a coin against glass. I told myself the silence would be relaxing. I told myself I'd finally catch up on sleep. I told myself it would feel like a private hotel, the kind you can't afford during the semester. But an empty dorm is not a hotel. It's a concrete canyon. It's a place built for hundreds of voices, and when those voices vanish, the absence becomes its own sound. My footsteps didn't just land, they announced themselves. Every heel strike multiplied ran ahead of me, came back from the far end of the hallway, and returned again like a question I couldn't answer. Even the air felt different, colder, as if the building stopped caring about comfort once there were no witnesses. The first night alone, I sat at my desk with my laptop open and a mug of instant ramen cooling too fast, and I kept glancing at the door like it might change when I wasn't looking. It was a standard dorm door, painted a dull beige, a peephole at eye level, a metal handle worn smooth by 1,000 stressed-out hands. I'd never been afraid of it before. It was just a barrier between me and the hallway. Now it felt like the thinnest possible border between my little rectangle of light and an ocean of darkness outside. The hallway lights were on a timer over break, supposedly to save energy. Every so often they would dim, then flare back to full brightness with a buzzing flicker that made the shadows jump in the corners. That's when I noticed something else. The hallway didn't smell like people anymore. All semester, it had been a mix of detergent, cheap cologne, microwave popcorn, and the faint sourness of wet winter boot. Over break, it smelled like paint and dust and cold metal. It smelled like a room that hadn't been used in years, not days. I tried to laugh at myself. I'm not a child. I'm a college student. I've walked home alone at night. I've taken the subway in bigger cities than this campus town. And still, the second I turned off my desk lamp, my skin prickled as if the darkness had leaned closer. I kept the TV on for noise, even when I wasn't watching. The laugh track of an old sitcom became my roommate. The commercials became proof that time was still moving forward. At around midnight, I heard the elevator groan and settle on some other floor empty, but impatient, as if it had been called by someone who changed their mind. I checked the resident group chat. Nothing. I checked the campus safety app. No alerts. From my window, I could see the quad covered in fresh snow, untouched, and perfect the kind of clean that makes you feel guilty for existing. The sidewalks had been plowed earlier, but by late night the wind had already started to erase the lines, smoothing everything back into white. That's when the thought hit me. If anything happened, if I yelled, if I ran, who would hear me? There were security cameras in the lobby, sure, and there were emergency call boxes outside, but there were no neighbors on my floor, no casual witnesses, no random door opening because someone needed to borrow a charger. Just me, a stack of textbooks, and a building full of empty rooms. I tried to be practical. The front entrance required a keycard. The side doors were locked. The stairwell doors clicked shut behind you with a satisfying final sound. It was safer than an apartment, I told myself. Safer than a house. Still, I started developing routines that felt less like safety and more like superstition. I checked the latch twice before bed. I kept my phone charging and my shoes by the door. I left my hoodie draped over my chair, so the room wouldn't look so occupied by only one body. I even listened for patterns, like the building had a heartbeat I could learn. The radiator hissed every 20 minutes. The pipes knocked when the heat shifted. The vending machine in the lounge clunked once an hour, like it was swallowing coins in its sleep. By the third night, I thought I was getting used to it. I really did. I was brushing my teeth, half asleep, when the hallway lights dimmed again, and through the bathroom door I saw my own shadow stretch long and thin across the tile. For a second, it looked like someone else's shadow tore a wrong at the shoulders until I moved and it moved with me. I spit, rinsed, and told myself to stop being dramatic. I went back to my room, locked the door, and climbed into bed with my phone in my hand, scrolling without reading, letting the blue light wash my brain clean. Adoi cinzeci, shi opta. The building made a sound I had not heard yet. It wasn't a pipe. It wasn't the elevator. It wasn't the wind against the window. It was the soft, deliberate click of a door handle being tested from the outside. I froze, with my thumb hovering over the screen because the sound came again, not on my door this time, but from somewhere down the hall. Click, pause, click. It was slow, like whoever was doing it didn't want to wake anyone up, or didn't want to be heard by anyone who was awake. My first thought was that an RA was making rounds, but winter break staffing was basically non-existent, and RAs didn't test door handles like that. They knocked. They announced themselves. Then I remembered the building was supposed to be empty, except for a handful of students who got approved to stay, and those students were scattered across floors for security reasons, meaning I wasn't supposed to have neighbors. The clicking continued, one handle, then another, each one followed by the faintest rattle, as if someone was putting just enough pressure on the latch to feel whether it would give. In the silence, the sound traveled perfectly. I could tell the direction. I could tell the distance. I could tell it was moving closer. Click. A couple seconds. Click. A metallic whisper. Click. It was like someone walking a row of cages, checking which door had been left open. I sat up, heart punching against my ribs, and pulled the blanket higher even though I knew it wouldn't stop anything. My eyes kept snapping to my door, waiting for my own handle to turn, waiting for that tiny, ordinary piece of hardware to become the only thing between me and a stranger. Part of me wanted to call campus police immediately. Another part of me kept insisting there had to be a normal explanation, because normal explanations are easier to live with than the alternative. Maybe maintenance was doing an emergency check. Maybe security was testing locks. Maybe one of the few students left had gotten locked out and was trying doors like an idiot. But the longer I listened, the less it sounded like an accident. The rhythm wasn't frantic. It was methodical, patient, like someone with time. I slid out of bed and moved without turning on a light. I held my breath. My room was dim from the hallway glow bleeding under the door, and that thin strip of light suddenly felt like a spotlight aimed at me. I crept to the door and put my ear near the wood. The handle on the door across from me clicked, and I felt it in my teeth. Then the door next to that. Then the one next to that. Each click landed a little closer, like footsteps made of metal. I looked down at the gap beneath my door. The light was steady. Nothing blocked it. No shadow passed by. That was almost worse, because it meant whoever it was standing still when they tested the handles, keeping their body close to the doors, careful not to cast a silhouette. Click. My door handle didn't move, but I heard the faint scrape of fabric, the smallest shift of weight in the hallway. Then, impossibly quiet, the sound of fingernails, or something like fingernails tapping once on the peephole glass, as if someone were checking whether it was covered from the inside. My stomach dropped. I hadn't thought of covering it. I hadn't thought of anyone looking back through it. I backed away slow, and my knee bumped the bed frame with a dull thud that sounded like a gunshot in that empty room. The clicking stopped instantly. All at once, the dorm was silent again. So silent, I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I stood there not breathing, waiting for the sound to return, waiting for a knock, waiting for the handle to twist. Instead, I heard the softest exhale right outside my door, close enough that if I put my hand on the wood, I felt like I'd feel the warmth of it on the other side. And then the handle finally turned. I don't know what I expected when it turned an immediate crash. A lock snapping my worst fear, rushing in all at once. Instead, the handle rotated slowly until it stopped, like whoever was on the other side was feeling the exact point where metal met resistance. The latch held. My deadbolt held. Then the handle eased back to neutral, with the gentleness of someone putting a glass down without making a sound. Another pause. Another test, this time sharper, impatient. The door didn't give. I backed toward my desk, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. I tried to call campus police, but my fingers were clumsy and the screen felt slick. When the call connected, I couldn't speak at first. I had to force air into my lungs, like starting an engine in the cold. I whispered my building name, my floor, my room number, and I heard myself sound ridiculous, even to me. Someone was trying door handles, I said. Someone was right outside my door. The dispatcher asked if I could see anyone. I stared at the peephole, convinced that if I moved toward it, the glass would suddenly go black with an eye pressed against it. I told her I couldn't see. I told her I was alone. I told her the building was supposed to be locked. While she kept me on the line, the clicking started again, not right at my door, but a few doors down, like whoever it was had decided my lock was too much effort. Click, rattle, click, rattle. It moved away in measured steps, testing each room with the same calm curiosity. Then I heard something that made my skin go cold in a different way. The soft electronic chirp of a keycard reader, accepting an attempt, not a failure beep. Not the angry buzz of denial. A clean, brief chirp followed by the faint suction sound of a door seal breaking. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened. I realized with a clarity that felt like falling that this wasn't just someone jiggling handles. Whoever it was had access at least sometimes. The dispatcher told me officers were on the way. She told me to stay in my room. She told me to lock everything and stay quiet. I did all of that, but the word on the way felt useless. In a building where every second stretched. I crouched behind my bed with my phone held close to my face, not daring to breathe too loudly, and I listened to the hallway swallow sound. No footsteps. No talking. No obvious movement. Just the occasional click of a handle, the subtle scrape of fabric, the whisper of someone trying to exist without leaving evidence. Minutes passed. Maybe 5. Maybe 15. Time didn't behave normally in that silence. Then from right outside my door I heard the keycard reader, on my own lock, wake up with a tiny beep. A keycard was being swiped. A denial tone. A pause. Another swipe. Another denial. Each attempt was followed by a faint, controlled exhale, frustration contained, like whoever it was didn't want to give themselves away by getting angry. I held my phone against my chest so the dispatcher wouldn't hear my breathing and mistake it for interference. Swipe. Denied. Swipe. Denied. Then right against the door, a voice spoke so softly it was almost friendly. Come on. Not shouted. Not threatening. Just coaxing, as if the door itself was being stubborn. I bit down on the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood because I knew in that moment that the person outside wasn't confused. They weren't lost. They weren't checking for an unlocked door as a shortcut. They were trying to get in. Finally, the hallway lights dimmed on their timer, and the strip of light under my door faded to a thin, grey line. I heard the slightest shuffle as someone stepped back. In the dim, a shadow slid across the crack beneath the door, low and close to the floor, like someone crouching to look in. I couldn't stop myself. I leaned forward just enough to catch the smallest glimpse through the peephole. For a split second I saw a hooded shape standing so close to my door that the image blurred. I didn't see a face. I saw the curve of a hood, the pale shine of something plastic in a hand, maybe a card, maybe a badge, maybe nothing at all. And then the figure drifted sideways, out of view, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't expect to be challenged. At the far end of the hall, a stairwell door clicked open, and cold air poured in with a smell like snow and exhaust. Footsteps descended fast, but controlled 2 flights at a time. Then the stairwell door shut, sealing the building again. When campus police finally arrived, they swept the floor with flashlights and radios crackling too loud in the silence. They checked every lounge, every bathroom, every empty room they had access to. They found nothing. No intruder, no prop door, no broken lock. One officer tried to reassure me, explaining that sometimes contractors had MasterCards during maintenance periods. Sometimes staff forgot to deactivate temporary access. Sometimes local kids tried doors for fun. But when I showed him my lock history on the door map, 3 denied swipes at 304A, his expression tightened in a way that made me feel less paranoid and more hunted. They asked if I wanted to move to a hotel for the night. I said no because I didn't want to admit how scared I was and because part of me believed leaving would prove the building had won. I stayed. I slept with the desk lamp on. I wedged a chair under the doorknob, like every cliché I'd ever laughed at. At sunrise, I walked the hallway, and the place looked ordinary. Again, clean floors, closed doors, holiday flyers curling on a bulletin board. Except for one detail I couldn't unsee, faint scuff marks on the paint around my handle, like someone had pressed too hard with a card or a tool, testing not just the lock, but the limit of what it would take to break routine. I reported it. They said they'd review the cameras. Later that day, the RA emailed me that the footage from the hallway camera had glitched during the exact hour I called. And that night, at 2:58 a.m., on the dot, the elevator came up to my floor, opened its doors to an empty hallway, and closed again, like it was answering a call from someone who knew exactly where I was. I was halfway through convincing myself the first incident was a fluke, when winter break taught me a second lesson in an empty dorm. Any voice you hear is automatically too loud. After the night with the door handles, campus security told me they'd increase patrols. My RA told me to keep my door deadbolted. My friends texted me a dozen variations of "please don't die" like it was a joke you could keep from becoming real by laughing at it first. And for a couple of days, the building behaved. The radiators hissed. The elevator groaned. The hallway lights flickered on their lazy timer. Nothing else. I started to fall back into routines. I cooked sad microwave meals in the common kitchen and ate them alone at the counter, listening to my fork scrape against a bowl because it was the only proof that I existed in that silence. I did laundry in the basement at noon, instead of at night. I kept my phone charged. I stopped wearing headphones even when I studied because I didn't want anything to sneak into the gaps between songs. By the end of the week, I could walk to the bathroom without sprinting. I could take a shower without imagining footsteps stopping outside the curtain. I could almost pretend the emptiness was normal. That was the danger. Your mind adjusts. It files fear away like paperwork and tells you you're fine right up until the next form lands on your desk and you realize you never actually had control. It was late on a Tuesday, late enough that the campus town felt shut down, late enough that even the streetlights outside looked tired. I had fallen asleep with my textbook open on my chest, the pages leaving a faint pattern on my skin when I finally woke up. The room was too warm from the heat cycling and my mouth tasted like stale coffee. I checked the time on my phone, 3:07 a.m. The moment I saw the numbers, my stomach tightened because 3 a.m. in an empty building stops feeling like a time and starts feeling like a location. I sat up and listened the way you do when you wake up and you can't remember why your body is tense. At first I heard nothing. Then I heard the faintest shuffle in the hallway, rubber soles on linoleum, careful and slow. I told myself it was security doing rounds. I told myself it was another student staying over break, heading to the bathroom. I told myself anything that didn't end with me being wrong. Then came the knock. Not a loud knock, not a pounding. A polite, measured tapping that made my skin prickle because it was exactly how someone would knock if they expected me to open the door. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. I didn't move. My eyes locked on the door like it had become a screen, and I was waiting for the picture to appear. 3 taps again, and then a voice close enough to be right on the other side of the wood said, "Hey, sorry, I forgot my key." It was a young male voice. Calm. Slightly embarrassed. The kind of tone that assumes you'll help, because helping is normal and refusing is rude. For a split second, my brain tried to comply. I pictured some exhausted student who'd stayed for a lab project, locked out after a smoke break, and now needed someone to let him into the floor. Then the reality of winter break snapped back into place. My floor was supposed to be empty. The few approved residents were placed on separate floors, and after the door handle night, I had memorized the names of the only other 2 people in the building. Neither of them was a guy. I didn't answer. Outside, the voice continued, still soft, still reasonable. "Can you just open up for a second? I left my card in my room. I'm on this floor." The sentence landed wrong. He said he left his card in his room, but if he was on this floor, why would he be at my door? Specifically, why not knock on the lounge door or go to the stairwell and down to the front desk? The taps came again, a little faster. "I can hear you in there," the voice said, and the casual confidence in that line made my throat close. I slid out of bed and stepped toward my door, but I didn't touch the lock. I stopped a few feet away, listening. I could hear breathing steady close. I could hear fabric shift, like someone adjusting their weight. Then, underneath it all, I heard something that didn't belong, the faint scratch of plastic against metal like a card being run along a reader over and over, searching for the right angle. He hadn't forgotten his key. He was trying to make one work. I should have backed away right then and called campus police without hesitation. But there is a social reflex that kicks in when someone speaks to you politely through a closed door. It makes you want to respond to prove you're not a paranoid person, to be the kind of neighbor you think you are. So I did the stupid thing. I spoke, but I kept my voice low and my hand far from the lock. "Who are you?" I asked. There was a pause just long enough to feel like he was choosing from a menu of answers. "Dude, I live here," he said, and he let out a short laugh that sounded rehearsed. "I'm just locked out. Come on." If he really lived there, he'd have said a room number immediately. He'd have said a name. He'd have sounded annoyed at himself, not annoyed at me. I asked, "What room?" Another pause. Then 302. My room was 318. There wasn't even a 302 on my side of the building. The numbering didn't work like that. My heart started to beat faster, and it made my ears ring so loudly, I almost didn't hear what came next. The tiny electronic wake-up of my lock's reader, followed by the quick, clean tap-tap of someone swiping a card. Denied. Swipe. Denied. Swipe. Denied. Between attempts, he kept talking in that calm, friendly tone, like conversation could cover the noise. "Look, man, it's freezing out here," he said. "I'll be in and out. I just need to grab my stuff. Out here. Not in the hallway. Out here." The word slid under my skin because it implied a door he'd come through and maybe planned to go back out of. I pictured the stairwell door at the end of the hall, the one that led down to the lobby. I pictured the lobby itself, with its darkened front desk, and the big glass doors that separated the building from the empty quad. If he was truly trapped outside in the cold, why was he upstairs? How did he get past the keycard entrance? "Go downstairs," I said. "Call security." He chuckled again, but this time there was no humor in it. "Security's not going to do anything. They never do anything." And then his voice lowered, getting closer, as if he had leaned toward the crack under my door. "Just open it. I can see your light." The thing was, my light was off. The only illumination in my room was the faint glow of my phone. I stared at the strip of darkness under the door and felt my mouth go dry. If he thought he saw light, it meant he wasn't looking at the crack the way a normal person would. It meant he was looking at the peephole. I reached up slowly and covered the peephole with my palm. The glass was cold. I imagined an eye on the other side and almost pulled my hand away. Outside, he stopped swiping the card. "Why'd you do that?" he asked, still quiet. I didn't answer. I didn't move. My phone was in my hand, my thumb hovering over the emergency button, and I realized I was waiting for a sound that would tell me whether he was still there. Instead, I heard the softest scrape, like fingernails tracing the edge of the peephole from the outside. Then he whispered a name. My RA's name. I froze. "She said you'd help," he murmured. He said my RA's name like it was a password, like it was supposed to unlock something in me the way his cards couldn't unlock the door. I didn't answer. I didn't argue. I did the only thing I could do without touching the lock I called. I hit the campus police number and held the phone tight to my ear, trying to keep my breathing quiet, trying to make my voice sound steady when it finally connected. Outside, he heard the faint click of my screen, or the muffled ringtone. Something tipped him off, because he stopped talking mid-sentence. "Who are you calling?" he asked, and the friendliness dropped out of his voice so fast it felt like the lights going out. I didn't respond. I kept my mouth close to the receiver, and whispered my building, my floor, my room, and the fact that a man was outside my door trying cards and asking me to open up. The dispatcher started asking questions, but I could barely hear her over the sound of my own pulse. On the other side of the door, the man exhaled sharply, like someone disappointed. Then he tried the handle again. Harder. The latch held, but the door rattled in its frame, and I felt it through the soles of my feet. "Listen," he said, and now there was a flat edge to every word. You don't want to do this. Just open up, and it's over. It's over. Like I had started something. Like I owed him a clean ending. I backed away until my legs hit the bed. I kept the phone line open, but I lowered it, so the dispatcher wouldn't hear his exact words and decide I was exaggerating. I knew that was stupid. I knew every detail mattered. I just couldn't stand the thought of someone else hearing him so close to me. It felt intimate, in a way that made me sick. The swiping started again, faster, now desperate. Swipe, denied. Swipe, denied. Then the beep changed. Not an acceptance chirp, but a different tone, like the reader was processing something it didn't understand. I imagined a cloned card, a stolen staff badge, a piece of plastic with a magnetic strip that had no business being near my door at 3 a.m. Open it, he repeated, and he knocked again. Not polite, this time not measured. 2 heavy thuds that shook dust from the top of my door frame. Through the peephole still covered by my hand, I felt movement pressure, like he had leaned in close. I can wait, he said softly. I've got all night. That line landed like ice water, because it wasn't a threat to break in quickly. It was a promise that he didn't need to hurry, like he was confident the building was his, and time was just another key he carried. The dispatcher told me officers were on the way. She told me to stay quiet. She told me not to open the door for anyone who didn't identify themselves properly. As she said it, the man outside shifted, and for a second I heard the smallest telltale sound, the faint clink of metal on metal. Keys. More than one. A key ring. My throat tightened. If he had keys, why the cards? Why the act? Then I heard footsteps. His footsteps move away from my door at a controlled pace, like he didn't want me to think he was running. He stopped a few feet down the hall. I could tell by how the silence changed, by how his breathing no longer pressed against my door. Okay, he said, louder now, like he was addressing the empty hallway as much as he was addressing me. Okay, we'll do it the hard way. A second later, the hallway lights flickered and dimmed, and I heard the stairwell door at the end of the hall open with that cold, sucking draft. Footsteps descended. The door shut. I waited for the relief that should have followed, but it didn't come. The building didn't feel safer. It felt like a chessboard after someone moves a piece you didn't see. Campus police arrived within minutes, but in my head, it took an hour. They asked me to describe him. I couldn't. I hadn't seen his face. That was the point. They checked the lobby logs. The front entrance hadn't registered a valid swipe at that time. They checked the stairwells. Empty. They checked the cameras. One hallway camera had a frozen frame for a 12-minute span that started at 3:06 a.m. The officer didn't say glitch this time. He just stared at the playback and went quiet. Before they left, they asked if I wanted to relocate to another room closer to the security office. I said yes because I was done pretending pride mattered more than being alive. When I grabbed my backpack and stepped into the hallway with the officers, I saw something on the floor right in front of my door. A single strip of painter's tape pressed flat to the linoleum. It hadn't been there earlier. On the tape, written in thin black marker, was my room number, perfectly neat, like it had been copied from a roster, like someone had labeled a box they planned to come back for. I didn't sleep the rest of that night, and for the rest of winter break, every time I passed a bulletin board, every time I saw an RA clipboard, every time I heard a polite knock anywhere in that building, my body reacted like it was happening again, because the scariest part wasn't that he knew my RA's name. It was that he knew which door was mine, and he wanted me to know that he knew. After the second night, I stopped calling it my dorm and started calling it the building, like changing the word could make it less personal. Campus police moved me to a room closer to the security office, a shorter walk from the lobby, a better camera angle, at least, that's what they said. The new room looked identical to my old one. Same beige door, same peephole, same gap at the bottom where hallway light leaked in like a thin blade. I tried to treat it like a reset. I taped a towel over the peephole. I wedged a chair under the handle. I tested the deadbolt until my hand hurt, because repetition felt like control. For 2 days nothing happened, and I started to believe the label on the floor outside my old room had been a prank, and the camera skips had been bad timing. Then on the 3rd night, the hallway light felt brighter, not because it changed, but because my eyes kept pulling toward the crack under the door. I was lying in bed with my phone dimmed down, when a shadow slid across that crack like a slow blink. It wasn't the quick, casual shadow of someone walking to the bathroom. It moved in, stopped, and stayed. The strip of light beneath my door went from pale yellow to nearly black, as if a person had stepped right up to it and planted their feet. I waited for the next sound, the knock, the handle, the voice. Nothing came. Just the shadow perfectly still pressed to the floor line. In an empty dorm, stillness is loud. It's the kind of quiet where you can hear your own pulse count seconds, where a distant radiator hiss sounds like someone whispering from another room. I told myself it had to be security doing a silent check, but if it was staff, why stand there without announcing themselves? Why hold position like they were listening for me to breathe? I unlocked my phone as quietly as I could, but in the stillness, even that tiny click felt loud. The shadow didn't move. A minute passed. Then another. The building's heat cycled, and the pipes pinged like small metal taps, and the shadow didn't flinch. I slid out of bed and grabbed my metal water bottle. Not because it was a weapon, but because it was something solid I could hold to keep my hands from shaking apart. I crouched and stared at the gap, hoping to see shoes. I saw nothing but darkness. It was as if the person was standing close enough to block the light, but far enough back that their feet were out of view. That detail felt deliberate. Close enough to let me know they were there. Far enough to keep me from identifying anything. I whispered, "Who is it?" The shadow didn't answer. Instead, I heard the faintest sound of breathing through the door, steady control, like someone practicing not to exist. I called campus police and said someone is outside my door, and they're not moving. The dispatcher asked if the person had spoken or tried the handle. I said no, and even saying that felt wrong, because it sounded like I was reporting a ghost instead of a human being. She told me officers were on the way, and I hated how familiar that phrase had become. While I stayed on the line, the shadow shifted sideways slowly, like the person had lowered themselves to a crouch. The blackness at the crack rose and fell, and I realized they were changing height, trying to find a better angle. Then the towel over my peephole tugged, once the smallest pull, as if someone outside had touched the glass and felt resistance. My stomach dropped. I hadn't thought you could feel a covered peephole from the other side, but that tiny tug told me they were right up against it. For a long stretch, nothing happened. The shadow remained. Minutes stacked. My legs cramped from crouching, but I didn't stand, because standing felt like surrendering the only advantage I had, awareness. At one point the elevator came up to my floor, opened to the empty hallway and closed again. The sound was distant, but it made the shadow shift just slightly, like it was listening too. I heard the soft electronic wake-up of my lock's reader, followed by a single quick beep, then nothing, as if someone had tapped a card against it just to see if I'd react. The dispatcher asked if I could see anything under the door. I said, "Just the shadow." My voice cracked on the word shadow because it felt ridiculous that a silhouette could terrify me this much. Then very softly a voice said, "You moved." It wasn't angry. It sounded almost amused, like they'd solved a puzzle. The voice continued, still calm. "They think that helps." My throat tightened because that meant whoever it was had known my old room and now knew my new one, and the only people who should have known that were the officers and the housing staff who escorted me. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The towel fluttered again, a light tap from the outside like a finger drumming on glass. The shadow slid away from the crack entirely, letting the hallway light return in a thin, sickly line. For one stupid second I thought maybe they'd left. Then a narrow stripe of darkness appeared higher than before, like a hand placed flat against the bottom of the door at a new angle. A thin object slipped under the door, something flat and stiff, like a card. It moved back and forth, slow searching as if mapping the space like a blind person reading a page. I realized the shadow hadn't been about intimidation. It had been about observation, learning how long it took me to call whether I approached the door, whether I'd covered the peephole, whether I'd wedged the chair the way people do in movies. The object withdrew, and the shadow returned, filling the crack again. as if they'd resumed their original stance. Then the voice sighed close enough to make the wood feel thin, always calling someone else. And with the same quiet control I'd heard before, the shadows slid away down the hall. I heard no footsteps, at first, just the absence lifting. Then, far off the stairwell, door breathed open and shut, letting in a thread of cold air that smelled like snow and car exhaust. When officers reached my floor, they found an empty hallway and steady fluorescent lights. They checked the bathrooms, the lounge, the stairwells, nothing. They checked the camera outside the security office. The one they promised was reliable, and it recorded my hallway perfectly, except for the exact 10 minutes when the shadow had been at my door. The footage didn't freeze. It didn't glitch. It just skipped, like someone had cut a clean hole out of the timeline. One officer stared at the gap in the recording and said carefully, "Could you have fallen asleep?" I didn't argue because arguing would have meant negotiating with the idea that I imagined the towel tug, the beep at my lock, the voice that knew I moved. After they left, I sat on the floor with my back against the bed, watching the crack under the door until dawn. Low near the floor where you'd never think to look, there was a dark smudge on the inside edge of the wood like a fingerprint dragged across paint, and pressed into the dust line beneath it, shallow and curved like a grin, was a crescent mark, as if someone had held their face close and smiled against the door for a long, quiet time. At chas, 2 M. After the sky turned from black to a bruised grey, my phone buzzed with a facilities notification I hadn't subscribed to. Unusual water usage detected. It listed the empty floor above mine. Then from the ceiling I heard the first faint rush of pipes, feeling like someone upstairs had decided to take a long hot shower in a building that was supposedly empty. The notification about unusual water usage should have been comforting, because it was proof that something in the building was being monitored. Instead, it made my stomach clench, because it told me the building was aware of a presence that security could not see. It pointed to the floor above mine, a floor that was supposed to be closed for winter break, lights dimmed, lounge-locked rooms, unassigned. A minute after the buzz, I heard it, a faint rush through the pipes, then the unmistakable sound of water hitting tile steady and continuous, like someone upstairs had turned on a shower and planned to stay under it for a long time. In a normal week, the sound would have been background noise. Over break, it felt like a message. I lay there, listening, trying to decide whether I was hearing what I feared or fearing what I heard. Water in a dorm travels. It echoes through vents, vibrates through risers, turns every wall into a speaker. Still, I could tell the difference between a radiator hiss and a shower. This was water with intention. I called campus police again, and the dispatcher sounded tired in a way that made me feel guilty, like I was turning the empty dorm into a personal crisis hotline. I told her there was a shower running on the vacant floor above, and she paused, then asked, "Are you sure it is not pipes?" "I'm sure," I said, because the cadence of the water was too human. Bursts and pauses, like someone stepping in, adjusting the temperature, moving around. She said an officer would check. While I waited, the sound stopped. Not a fade, not a gradual shut-off. It ended cleanly, the way a hand turns a knob to the exact off position. The silence that followed felt heavier than the water. An officer arrived 10 minutes later. He met me at my door and walked with me to the stairwell, his flashlight beam gliding over closed doors, like he expected something to blink back. On the landing, he swiped his card at the floor above access panel. Denied. He tried again. Denied. They lock it down over break, he said, as if that settled everything. Then from the other side of the stairwell door, we heard a single drip hit metal. Then another. Then the soft, distant patter of water somewhere above, like an aftertaste. The officer stared at the door, and for the first time I saw his certainty wobble. He radioed for maintenance, but maintenance was on call and not nearby, which in the middle of winter meant not coming until morning. He told me to go back to my room to keep the door locked, call if I heard anything else. I did, and I hated how quickly my brain tried to normalize it again. By afternoon, the sun turned the snow outside into a bright, innocent glare, and I almost believed I had overreacted. Almost. That night, the shower started again, at 3:06 a.m., like it was scheduled. This time, I did not wait for my fear to build a story. I sat up and listened, carefully counting, mapping, learning, the way you learn an enemy's routine. The water ran for 11 minutes. It paused for 2. It ran again for 5, softer, like a lower pressure stream. I heard what could have been a soap bottle thump. I heard what could have been a foot slide on wet tile. And underneath it, faint but unmistakable, I heard humming. Not a song I recognized, just a low, steady hum, like someone soothing themselves while they did something they were not supposed to be doing. I called campus police, and the dispatcher sent the same officer from earlier. He arrived faster this time, and we stood in the stairwell again, listening. The shower cut off the moment our footsteps hit the landing, as if whoever was upstairs could feel vibrations through the building the way I could. The officer swiped the access panel again. Denied. There's no way anyone should be up there, he muttered, more to himself than to me. Then the stairwell door handle on the floor above us clicked once from the other side, like someone testing whether it would open down into our space. We both froze. Another click. Then the soft electronic chirp of a card reader, accepting a swipe clean and brief, not a denial. The door did not open toward us, but the sound proved what I had been trying to explain: somebody had access. The officer stepped back and radioed again, voice sharper now. He asked for a supervisor. He asked for another unit. While the radio crackled, I heard the faint squeak of a shower curtain rod sliding, the kind of sound you only hear when the building is empty and your nerves are tuned to it. Then the water started again. Not in a bathroom this time, but somewhere closer, like a sink being turned on and left running. The officer tried the door again, even though he knew it would not open for him. Denied. And then from above us, a wet footprint appeared. Not in front of us, on the ceiling tile over the stairwell, landing as if water had pooled and leaked down in the shape of a foot. It dripped once, then twice, and the drip landed on the concrete between our shoes. I looked up and felt my throat tighten, because the leak was not spreading randomly. It was stepping. A second wet print bloomed beside the first, then a third spaced, like someone walking slowly across the floor above, directly over our heads. The officer saw it too. His face went pale under the fluorescent light. "Back," he said, and he guided me down the stairs, away from that landing, away from the place where the building was trying to show us movement without showing us a body. At my floor, he stopped and listened. The shower sounds were gone, now replaced by a quiet that felt staged. "Go inside," he said. "Lock it. Don't open for anyone." I did, and the moment my deadbolt clicked, the water started again. This time, in the bathroom, on my own floor down the hall, the one that should have been empty. It was the communal shower room. I could hear the spray clearly now, close enough that the tile echo reached my door. My phone buzzed with another facilities alert. Water flow detected. Floor 3. Communal. The officer turned his head toward the hallway, like a dog hearing something it does not like. He walked toward the bathroom, flashlight up, radio in his hand. I stayed behind my door, watching through the crack under it, because after the shadow night I did not trust my own hallway. His boots passed my door, then stopped. The shower noise stopped at the exact same instant. From inside the bathroom, his voice echoed low and cautious. "Hello, campus police. Anyone in here?" No answer. Then from the crack under my door I saw a different shadow cross, the light thin and quick, moving the wrong direction. It was not the officer's broad outline. It was someone slipping past, close to the wall, careful to stay out of the flashlight beam. My blood went cold. I heard the stairwell door at the end of the hall, open, then shut, then open again, like someone deciding which way to go. The officer radioed louder now, and in the middle of his words, the keycard reader on my door woke up with a tiny beep. A swipe. Denied. Another swipe. Denied. I stood perfectly still because any movement would announce exactly where I was in the room. Outside, a voice whispered, not friendly, not amused, just certain. "You like the sound of water, don't you?" Then the shower on my floor turned on again, full blast, drowning the hallway in noise, like a curtain being pulled across a stage. And behind that wall of water I heard my lock click as if something finally had found the right key. I thought the worst part about the shower incident was the moment my lock clicked, like it finally recognized the right key. But the worst part was what happened after the hallway went quiet again. The officer was still somewhere down the corridor, radios crackling, doors opening and shutting, and the communal shower was still running full blast like someone was trying to erase every other sound the building could make. Then right outside my door, the keycard reader chirped once more soft clinical, followed by a denial tone that felt almost performative. Like whoever was swiping wanted me to know they were still there, and still testing. I stood frozen with my phone in my hand, and listened for footsteps. None. The shower cut off abruptly, the echo collapsed, and the silence returned, so suddenly it felt staged. A few minutes later, campus police pounded on my door and announced themselves, and I opened up just long enough to see 2 officers in the hallway with their flashlights up, faces tight, scanning the corners as if the walls could move. They didn't find anyone. Again, they did what they always did. Checked the bathrooms, checked the stairwell, checked the lounge, and then stared at the camera feeds like the answer would eventually appear if they watched hard enough. One officer told me the swipe attempts on my door could have been someone messing around with a deactivated card, but he didn't sound like he believed that, and he definitely didn't sound like he wanted me to stay alone in the building. They offered to put me in an on-campus guest room, but it was in another dorm across the quad, and the idea of walking outside in the dark across untouched snow made my skin crawl. So I stayed because staying felt like the only choice that didn't involve stepping into a wider empty space. The next day, they changed my lock code and reissued me a new card. I watched the housing staff program it at the front desk, watched the little screen flash confirmation, watched them smile too brightly, the way people do when they want you to calm down. Now nobody can get into your room without this new credential, the staffer said. I nodded like I believed in systems again. That night I slept with my chair, wedged, and my phone charging, and a towel taped over the peephole, and for the first time in a week, I managed to drift off for real. I woke up to the elevator, not the sound of it arriving because in an empty dorm you learn the difference between arriving and being there. I woke up to the soft ding, the hydraulic sigh, and the bright rectangle of light seeping under my door as the elevator opened on my floor. I sat up, staring at that new light source like it was an intruder all by itself. The elevator doors stayed open longer than normal. Then they began to close, stopped halfway, opened again. Like something had triggered the sensor. Like someone was standing in the doorway and stepping back at the last second. The doors tried again, closed halfway, opened. The building's elevator had become a patient animal, testing, waiting, obeying a presence I couldn't see. I grabbed my phone and checked the time 3:13 a.m. The hallway light under my door remained steady, but the elevator light pulsed with every attempt to close, making the brightness under my door throb like a heartbeat. I listened for footsteps. Nothing. No shuffle. No cough. No keys. Just the elevator's mechanical breath and the faint, almost inaudible squeal of its cables settling. I called campus police, because at this point calling had become less about getting help and more about creating witnesses. The dispatcher asked what I was seeing. I said I wasn't seeing anything. I was hearing the elevator open and close, like someone was playing with it. She told me officers would check. While I stayed on the line, the elevator finally closed, and the light under my door faded back to its usual thin line. I waited for relief. Instead, the elevator dinged again a minute later, and opened again on my floor. This time I heard it clearly. A soft scuff inside the elevator car, like a shoe shifting on rubber matting. The sound was tiny but distinct, and in an empty dorm, tiny sounds are the most honest ones. I held my breath. The doors stayed open. No footsteps exited. The scuff happened again, closer to the threshold. Then the doors tried to close, stopped, and opened fully. I realized whoever was in there wasn't walking out. They were keeping the doors open on purpose. They were making sure the hallway filled with that sterile elevator light. They were making the corridor feel occupied. They were forcing me to imagine a person standing just out of my sight, waiting for me to do what humans do when they're curious, open the door and look. The officer arrived and walked down the hall with his flashlight pointed at the elevator like it might lunge. The elevator doors were closed by then, and the hallway looked normal again, Closed doors, clean floor, fluorescent hum. The officer pressed the call button. The elevator came up immediately, as if it had been waiting right below. The doors opened to an empty car. He stepped inside, checked the corners, checked the ceiling, checked behind the safety rail like he expected a person to be folded up in impossible geometry. Nothing. He radioed the front desk to pull the elevator logs. "See who called it," he said. 10 minutes later, he came back to my door and told me something that made my stomach turn cold. The elevator was being called to my floor from the inside of the elevator car. Not from the lobby. Not from another floor. From the car itself. "That can happen if a button sticks," he added quickly, but he didn't meet my eyes when he said it. The next night, I tried to stay awake past 3 a.m., determined not to be surprised. But exhaustion always wins, eventually. I dozed off and woke again to the same ding and sigh, like the building had an appointment with me. 3:13 a.m. again. The elevator opened on my floor and stayed open. I sat in bed, staring at my door, listening. This time I heard the faintest tapping from the hallway. 2 quick taps, then a pause, then 2 taps again. Not on my door. On the elevator's metal frame. Like someone testing the sound it made. Like someone getting comfortable. The doors attempted to close and stopped. The car's sensor beeped softly. A slow exhale drifted down the hall, so faint I almost convinced myself it was the radiator. Then I heard something that made my skin tighten, a low laugh, muffled by the elevator walls. The kind of laugh you make when you're alone and pleased with yourself. I called campus police and whispered, "Someone is in the elevator." The dispatcher asked how I knew. I said I heard them. She stayed on the line. The tapping stopped. Then the elevator doors finally closed, as if the person inside had decided the show was over. A minute later, the elevator came back up again and opened. The light under my door brightened, and then from the other side of my door, the lock reader woke up with a tiny beep, the sound it makes when a card is tapped. My new card should have been the only one that worked. Denied. Another tap. Denied. The taps were slow, deliberate, almost bored. Not someone panicking. Someone experimenting. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I covered the peephole towel with my hand anyway, as if the fabric needed backup. The elevator dinged softly behind those lock attempts like punctuation. When officers arrived, the elevator was empty again. The hallway camera showed nothing. The elevator camera, according to the officer, was not accessible due to maintenance. That phrase hit me like a joke. The building was telling at my expense. The officer walked me down to the lobby and showed me the log printout from housing my card had been used once at 3:12 a.m. to enter the stairwell door on my floor. I stared at the paper. "That's impossible," I said, because I was holding my card in my hand. The officer asked if I'd lent it to anyone. I told him I hadn't spoken to another student in days. He asked if I was sure it was my card. I turned it over and saw on the back a small smear of something dark near the barcode, like a fingerprint that had been pressed too hard. I had never noticed it before. Back in my room, I stood with my ear against the door, listening for the elevator to return. It didn't. What returned instead was a faint vibration in the wall, like the elevator was traveling, going up and down without ever stopping at a floor long enough to be real. Then my phone buzzed with another facilities notification, elevator service mode enabled. I hadn't enabled anything, and in the quiet that followed, I heard a sound from the hallway that I had only heard from inside the elevator, before a soft scuff on rubber, slow and close, stopping right outside my door, as if someone had stepped out of the car and taken their time walking here. The reader on my lock chirped once, and this time it didn't deny immediately. It paused, as if it recognized something. Then it beeped the clean acceptance tone. My deadbolt was still thrown, but the latch clicked, and in the thin gap beneath the door, the elevator's bright, sterile light suddenly disappeared, replaced by darkness. Because someone stood so close, they blocked it completely. The next morning, housing moved me again. Not to another floor, this time but to a room with an adjoining vacancy, which they framed like a safety upgrade. Fewer neighbors, fewer variables, fewer chances for a stranger to blend in. I wanted to laugh at that, because the entire problem was that there were no neighbors, only variables. Still, I took the move because the officers insisted it would put me closer to an emergency exit and a better camera line. The new room sat at the end of a shorter hall, with one vacant room directly beside it, and a janitor closet across the way. The vacant room's door was taped with a printed notice, "Closed for break. Do not enter." The tape looked official, like bureaucracy could function as a physical barrier. I stared at that door longer than I should have, because it felt like a place the building could hide something. I asked the housing staff if anyone else had access to that room. They told me only maintenance and the RD. I asked if the key system had been audited after the elevator locks. They said yes, and the speed of the answer made me doubt it. That night I tried to sleep with the idea that at least I could listen to the wall beside my bed and know what was happening next door. The vacant room should have been silent. It should have been a sealed box. Around 140 AM, I heard the first sound from that wall, a low scrape like furniture being shifted across carpet. It was slow and heavy, not the quick drag of a chair. It sounded like someone moving a dresser, inch by inch. I sat up in bed, listening. The scrape stopped, then resumed, then stopped again, like whoever was doing it was adjusting their grip. I stared at the wall and felt my stomach tense, the same way it had with the door handle clicks. The rhythm wasn't random. It was careful. It was purposeful. I told myself it could be building, settling pipes, expanding anything that didn't require a human being inside a room that was closed for break. But then I heard a second sound layered over the scrape, the faint rustle of plastic, like a trash bag being opened, and a soft thump like something being set down on a desk. Those are not building noises. Those are choices. I got out of bed, stepped quietly to my door, and pressed my ear to the wood. The hallway was empty. No footsteps. No voices. The closed door beside mine sat there, with its tape intact, the notice flat against it. From inside that room, the scraping continued steady now, as if whatever was being moved had reached a longer stretch of floor. I called campus police and said someone is moving furniture in the vacant room next to me. The dispatcher asked if I'd seen anyone enter. I said no. She asked if the door was forced. I said the tape looked untouched. There was a pause on the line then, she said. Stay in your room. The scraping stopped the moment I said the word police. It wasn't gradual. It halted like someone froze mid-motion. I held my breath, listening for any sign of a person realizing they'd been heard. Nothing. Then a new sound came softer, a series of tiny taps against the wall right where my bed's headboard met the paint. Tup, tup, tup. Not random. Not piping. A pattern, like someone drumming fingers, or like someone mimicking a knock without using a door. I backed away from the wall and felt my skin prickle. The taps stopped. A minute later the scraping resumed, but now it was closer to the shared wall, like they had moved whatever they were moving, right up against it. I put my palm on the paint and felt a faint vibration, as if the other side of the wall was breathing. Officers arrived and stood with me in the hallway, flashlights aimed at the vacant door. One officer pointed at the tape. Still sealed, he said, sounding relieved. He tried his radio. He called for maintenance. No answer. He called the RD. No answer. He asked if I wanted them to force entry. The idea of watching them rip that tape off felt like pulling a bandage off an infection. I nodded. The officer peeled the tape back slowly. It made that dry, tearing sound that always feels louder than it should. He turned the handle. Locked. He used a master key. The lock clicked, and the door swung open with the slow reluctance of a room that didn't want to be seen. The vacant room smelled wrong. Not mold or rot, just lived-in air that had been trapped. Stale warmth, like someone had been breathing in there with the door closed. The officers swept the room with flashlights. The bed was made with hospital-tight corners untouched. The desk chair was pushed in. The closet door was shut. No suitcase. No coat. No obvious squatter. See, one officer said like the absence was supposed to erase the sounds I'd heard. Then his flashlight beam caught the carpet near the window, and he stopped. There were drag marks. Not deep gouges, but subtle tracks in the carpet pile, like something heavy had been pulled from the far corner to the shared wall and then back again. And on the desk, right beneath the dorm-issued lamp, sat a single plastic dining hall fork clean, placed neatly as if it belonged there. The officer stared at it. "This room hasn't been entered since before break," he said. He lifted the fork with 2 fingers and turned it over. There was a smear on the handle, dark and oily like fingerprint residue. I looked around the room again, and suddenly the untouched bed didn't look untouched. The comforter had a shallow depression near the edge, the kind of dip that happens when someone sits down and then stands up, trying to fluff it back into place afterward. The closet door, when the officer opened it, was empty except for hangers, but the floor of the closet had scuff marks fresh against the dust line, like shoes had turned there, like someone had stood inside and shifted their weight. The officers checked the bathroom. Dray. No water. No towels missing. They checked under the bed. Empty. They checked the ceiling tiles. Intact. Could have been pipes. The officer tried again, but his voice lacked conviction now because pipes don't leave forks on desks. They told me they would lock the vacant room and place a seal over the latch that would show if it was opened again. They promised extra patrols. They promised review of maintenance access. Then they left, and the hallway returned to its fluorescent hum, and I went back into my room and sat on my bed, staring at the shared wall like it had turned into a screen. I didn't sleep. I waited. At 3:2 the dragging started again. Not in the vacant room this time, but in my own room behind me, so softly at first I thought it was my imagination. The desk chair, my desk chair, was moving. I turned slowly and saw it inching away from the desk legs, whispering against linoleum, moving in a straight line toward my door. No hands, no visible force, just the chair, sliding as if someone invisible had grabbed it from the back. I stood up so fast, my knees knocked the bed frame, and the chair stopped instantly, as if it had been caught doing something it wasn't supposed to. I looked at the door. The chair was now perfectly positioned under the handle, like someone had been placing it there from inside to wedge me in. I grabbed the chair and shoved it back, my hands shaking, and that's when I heard the sound from the wall again. Tap, tap, tap. Same rhythm as before, but now it was coming from inside the vacant room, right through the shared paint. The taps continued slow and patient, like someone signaling I'm still here. I pressed my ear to the wall and listened past the taps. There was breathing, not loud, not dramatic, just a steady inhale and exhale so close it felt like it belonged to the room I was in. I stumbled back, heart hammering, and my phone buzzed with a facilities message. Room, seal, status. Open. I stared at the screen, because the vacant room had been sealed not even 2 hours earlier. I ran to my door and looked out through the peephole towel, lifting the edge just enough to see. The vacant room's door beside mine was closed. The tape seal they'd placed over the latch was still there, unbroken, perfect, which meant either the system was lying or the room had been opened without disturbing the seal, like someone had a way to enter that didn't involve the door at all. As I stood there, the dragging sound started again, but now it wasn't furniture. It was something heavier, slower, coming along the shared wall like a body being repositioned. The tap stopped, and a voice low and calm came through the wall, as clearly as if the plaster were paper. Don't call them this time. Then the light under my door vanished, because a shadow slid into place on the hallway side, and I heard the soft, familiar chirp of my lock reader, waking up, ready to accept whatever key the building had decided to recognize next. The first rule I broke after the voice in the wall told me not to call them was simple. I started documenting everything like my life depended on a paper trail. I kept my phone camera ready. I took screenshots of every facilities alert, every access log timestamp, every service mode enabled message that popped up like the building was proud of itself. I stopped trusting what I could explain and started trusting what I could prove. That decision is why I noticed the footprints. It was just after dawn when I stepped into the hallway. and at first I thought the dark shapes on the floor were scuffs from suitcases. Then my brain put the pattern together, bare footprints, wet spaced like someone had walked slowly on the balls of their feet, each print clean enough to show toe marks. They started directly in front of my door, right at the threshold, as if whoever made them had been standing close enough to block the light under my door and then stepped away. There were no shoe prints mixed in, no salt smears, no slush trail from outside. Just water, placed with intention, already drying at the edges into darker halos. I touched one with my fingertip. Cold. Fresh. I checked the ceiling for leaks. Dry. I checked the radiator line along the wall. No drip. The prints led away from me in a straight line, heading toward the common room at the far end of the hall, and there were no return prints. Whoever it was had walked away and simply stopped existing. I should have called campus police, but I heard that calm voice through the wall again. Don't call them this time. So instead I recorded. I aimed my camera at the prints and whispered the date and time like I was filing evidence. The screen focused, the little red dot appeared, and the hallway lights flickered. My phone's image stuttered, pixelating into blocks like a corrupted live stream. It corrected itself a second later, but the feeling stayed. Something in this building noticed when I tried to create proof. I followed the wet trail anyway, slow each step, echoing too loudly, each closed door looking like a mouth holding its breath. The dorm smelled like dust and cold paint, now, not people. And the silence had weight, the kind that makes you listen for your own breathing just to prove you're still there. My phone buzzed with a facilities alert. Moisture detected. Floor-free corridor. The timestamp on it was 1 minute ahead of the clock on my lock screen, like the building was writing its own report in advance. When I reached the common room door, the footprints ended right in front of it, toes pointed directly at the lock. The card reader was dark, dead like the room was truly closed. I leaned in without touching it, and the reader woke with a tiny chirp. A clean acceptance tone sounded no swipe, no card, followed by the soft click of the latch releasing. The door cracked open by itself, and cold air rolled out, carrying that stale, trapped smell I'd noticed in the vacant room next to mine. Only stronger, like a room that had been breathed in recently and then sealed. I nudged the door wider. The lights were off, but snow glare from the big windows turned everything a dim blue. In the middle of the room, a single chair had been pulled out and turned to face the doorway, centered perfectly like someone had staged it. The TV in the corner was onto grey static, the hiss filling the room like a held breath. I hadn't heard from the hallway because the door had been shut. The wet prints did not continue into the room. They stopped at the threshold like the person stepped inside without leaving a trace. On the table in front of the chair sat a dining hall tray with a single plastic fork placed neatly in the center, tines pointing toward the door like an arrow. Beside it was a keycard with an old campus logo and a strip of tape across it that read in thin black marker, "Closed for break." I took a photo. The screen flashed, and for half a second the static tightened into a pattern that looked almost like a face if you stared too hard. My phone buzzed. Occupancy sensor. Active. Common room. I didn't even know the common room had an occupancy sensor. I backed up a step and the chair creaked softly, not from my movement, but as if someone had put a hand on it. My flashlight beam caught moisture beaded along the bottom edge of a vent cover near the baseboard. A drop fell. Another. The drops were seeping outward, as if the vent itself was sweating. From behind the cover came a sound I could not rationalize away. A slow inhale, then an exhale right against metal. The static dipped into a deeper tone that made my teeth ache, and in that low hiss, I thought I heard a whisper trying to form words, like someone speaking through a mouthful of water. I stepped backward into the hallway, and the common room door swung shut behind me with a clean final click. I spun and grabbed the handle. Locked. The reader was dark again, as if it had never woken at all. My phone, which had been recording in my pocket, vibrated with the subtle buzz that means a file failed to save. I stood there, staring at the sealed door until the air stopped, smelling like cold breath. Then I walked back to my room without looking at the other doors. Back inside, the video showed a thumbnail of the corridor, then an error message corrupted. Only the photo remained. I tried to send it to myself by email, and the attachment failed twice. When it finally went through the metadata, On the image said it had been taken at 3:13 a.m., not sunrise. I stared at that timestamp until my eyes watered, because it meant either my phone was lying or I had lost hours without noticing. I went down to the lobby and showed the night officer anyway. He listened, nodded, then walked back upstairs with me, flashlight sweeping the hall. The wet footprints were gone. Not faded, gone. The floor was clean and dry like the water had never existed. He tried the common room door with his card. Denied. He tried again. Denied. He looked at the dark reader and said carefully, "This room is locked down for break." I told him it opened for me without a swipe. He didn't argue, but the set of his jaw said he didn't like the idea of a door deciding who it would obey. Before he left, he checked the hallway camera feed and went quiet. The camera didn't freeze this time. It showed my hallway empty, perfectly still for the entire morning. No me, no officer, no footprints, like the timeline had been wiped clean and replaced with a loop of nothing. That afternoon, I got an email from housing that said politely that unauthorized access to common areas was prohibited during break, and that any reports of anomalies should be directed to campus safety. It read like a warning, not help. At 3:13 a.m., the next night, the TV in the common room turned on by itself again. I knew because the static hiss traveled faintly through the vents, even with my door shut. My phone buzzed with one more alert, occupancy sensor active. Floor 3, common. And then, as if the building wanted to punish me for noticing, a new message appeared on my screen from an unknown number. No caller ID, just text. Stop filming. 2. At 3:13 a.m., the elevator dinged on my floor again, and when its light spilled under my door, it landed on a new mark on my carpet. A single wet footprint. Small bare toe marks, perfect, facing my bed, as if whoever made it had already been inside standing. There, in the dark, watching me sleep long enough for the water to drip and dry. By the time a wet footprint showed up inside my room, I had stopped thinking in terms of if and started thinking in terms of when. When will the lock finally give? When will I make one mistake? When will the building decide it's done being subtle? I needed clean clothes, and that requirement felt embarrassingly normal, but normal needs are how you get lured into unsafe places. I told myself I'd wait until noon, but I was down to mismatched socks and a damp hoodie, and the only washer that actually drained was always taken early. So at 10:30 p.m., tired and stubborn and sick of living like a hostage, I carried my hamper down to the basement. The stairwell smelled like wet concrete. The basement door required a card swipe. My card chirped acceptance, and the lock released with a heavy clunk that sounded like a vault. The moment I stepped through the door swung shut behind me and the air changed, colder, wetter, threaded with detergent and rust. The laundry room sat under flickering fluorescent tubes, washers on one wall, dryers on the other, a folding table stained with old bleach, and a floor drain that caught every drip the building forgot to hide. I chose the washer closest to the exit. When I lifted the lid, my stomach turned. Clothes were inside. Wet, warm. Not left in the washer all day. Warm, freshly rinsed heat, still trapped in the fabric like they'd been worn minutes ago. A grey hoodie. Sweatpants. An undershirt with a campus logo I didn't recognize. I checked the machine's display. Ling, ling, ling. Cycle complete. No error. Like someone finished and walked away without collecting anything, without leaving footprints, without leaving a reason. Behind me, a dryer made a soft click. Not a start, just the internal light flickering, as if the door had been opened and shut. I turned slowly and stared at the row of metal doors. All closed. All still. Then came a faint thump from inside. One drum, soft but deliberate, like something shifting its weight. My phone had no signal down there. The campus safety app spun as if it couldn't decide whether I existed in the basement. I decided to leave. Laundry could wait. Proof could wait. Pride could wait. I grabbed my hamper and went to the basement door. The reader blinked, waiting. I tapped my card. Denied. I tapped again. Denied. The tiny screen flashed access. Temporarily disabled. It wasn't a glitch that made sense. Doors don't disable themselves from the inside unless someone tells them to. The air behind me changed, like someone had entered the room without opening anything. I heard it in the way the silence tightened. Then from the far end of the laundry room, a low humming started human, steady, the same self-soothing sound I'd heard layered under the showers. I forced my voice to work. Campus police is on the way. I lied, and the words echoed off concrete and came back thinner. The humming stopped. The dryer's light went dark. That's when I saw the wet footprints. They were on the concrete near the washer, with the warm clothes darker than upstairs, because basement concrete holds moisture like memory. Bare toe marks clean. They led away from the washer, past the folding table toward a metal door I'd never paid attention to, marked authorized personnel only. The door wasn't fully latched. A thin line of darkness showed beneath it, and a draft seeped out smelling like insulation and old paper. I should have stayed by the main door and kept swiping until someone upstairs heard the reader beep, but the building had already proven no one was listening. I followed the prints to the service door, and the moment my fingers touched the handle, every dryer behind me roared to life at once, drums spinning like engines. The noise swallowed the room, like someone pulling a curtain across sound. I yanked the service door open and slipped through. On the other side was a narrow corridor, lined with pipes warmer than the laundry room and unmistakably lived in. The footprints continued, then turned into a small maintenance alcove. My flashlight caught cardboard laid out like flooring, an unzipped sleeping bag, a crushed water bottle, and a pile of dining hall forks, their plastic tines glinting like tiny teeth. Taped to the wall above the sleeping bag was a housing roster sheet, torn from a clipboard building, name, floors, room numbers. One number was circled in thick black marker. Mine. Below it in the same neat handwriting as the taped keycard upstairs, 2 words were added. Moved again. In the alcove, taped beside the roster, was a photocopied floor plan with a few camera icons circled in highlighter as if someone had studied where the building could and couldn't see. My stomach dropped. I hadn't told anyone my new room number, except officers and housing staff. Behind me in the corridor, rubber soles scraped softly on concrete. Careful. Unhurried. Close enough that I could smell damp fabric. I killed my flashlight and pressed flat against the wall, holding my breath until my lungs burned. The footsteps stopped at the mouth of the alcove. A calm voice spoke into the darkness, not asking where I was sounding like it already knew. "You always follow it," said. A pause. Then, softer. "Now you've seen it." I waited for a grab, for a lunge, for the moment horror stories usually turn violent. Instead, the footsteps retreated, slow and patient, as if the person had gotten what they wanted, just by making me stand there in the dark, reading my own room number on their wall. The dryer noise surged somewhere behind the service door, then abruptly cut off, plunging the corridor into a silence so clean it felt edited. I ran back to the laundry room and shoved the service door open. The room was empty. The washer that had held the warm clothes was now empty too, lid still raised like a mouth left open. The basement door reader blinked green again, as if nothing had ever been wrong. I tapped my card. Accepted. The lock released. As I ran back up the stairs, my phone buzzed with a local building alert, even without service. Unauthorized door open. Basement service. Time stamped a minute ahead again, like the system was always reporting me before I could report myself. I didn't stop until I was back on my floor under fluorescent lights that suddenly felt too bright to trust. Inside my room, everything looked normal for one heartbeat. Then I saw my desk chair had been moved and angled toward the door like an audience seat. On the chair sat a neatly folded grey hoodie, damp at the cuffs and warm in the middle like it had just come out of a washer. Balanced across it was a single plastic fork, placed carefully, like a signature. My phone caught signal and lit with a new text from an unknown number. "Thanks for washing." Upstairs, after the text arrived, I checked the hoodie and found something in its pocket. The old taped keycard from the common room, still damp along the edges, and a short strip of painter's tape with my room number written in the same neat marker. The message wasn't subtle anymore. It wasn't just that someone was in the building. It was that they were organizing me like inventory. I counted them without meaning to. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 knocks, again, exactly like the polite tapping that always came before someone asked me to open the door. Right after that, the wall beside my bed started to knock from the inside, slow and rhythmic, the same patient pattern I'd heard through paint before, reminding me that the building wasn't empty, and it never had been. I was so tired that even fear started to feel repetitive, like my body had run out of new chemicals to panic with, and that's exactly when the building changed tactics and got quieter. After the laundry room and the hoodie on my chair and the text that said, "Thanks for washing," I stopped expecting dramatic hallway encounters and started expecting small, precise violations that proved someone could touch my life without ever showing their face. I went to bed with my phone charging and my shoes on, because I didn't trust myself to wake up fast enough to run, and I tried to convince my brain that the knocking in the wall was just the heat. Old dorms knock, pipes expand, radiators pop. Every campus has that one building where the plumbing sounds like an animal at night. But the first knock didn't sound like pipes. It sounded like a knuckle. 3 taps, evenly spaced, coming from inside the wall right beside my headboard. Not the kind of directionless banging you hear when water pressure changes, but a tight, localized sound, like someone was inches away separated from me by paint and drywall. I held my breath, and the tapping repeated. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. The same polite pattern from the hallway, except now it was coming from inside the structure of my room. I sat up slowly and stared at the wall like my eyes could turn it transparent. "Stop," I whispered, not because I thought it would work, but because silence was the only thing I had left to offer. The tapping paused as if it was listening. Then it answered with 2 taps, a pause, then 1 tap. I stared at the wall confused, and the taps came again, 2 pause, 1. It felt like a code. It felt like a response. My phone buzzed and I almost dropped it. A text from the unknown number, "You talk too much." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sat there with my mouth open, because the timing was too clean. Someone heard me whisper. Someone close enough to tap back heard me say stop, and then someone with a phone decided to comment on it like we were having a conversation. I tried to call campus police, but my screen flashed. No service for a second, then recovered, then flashed again. The building had done that before in the basement, like certain pockets of space could swallow signal on command. I walked to my door and pressed my ear to it. The hallway was empty, fluorescent hum. Steady, no footsteps, no elevator, no voices. When I stepped away, the tapping started again faster, like whoever was doing it didn't want me to leave the wall unattended. I put my palm against the paint and felt a faint vibration beneath it. Not a knock now, but a subtle movement, like something shifting in a cavity. The dorm's walls were thin, but not hollow like that. Not in a way that could carry a vibration like a living thing. I went to my desk and grabbed a pen because my brain reached for the most ridiculous weapon available, and I tapped once against the wall testing. A second later, the wall tapped back in the exact same spot, slightly harder, like it was correcting my timing. I froze. I tapped twice. The wall tapped twice. I tapped 3 times. The wall tapped 3 times, but on the 3rd tap it lingered like a knuckle, stayed pressed there. Then the tapping shifted a few inches upward, slow sliding, and I imagined fingers dragging along the inside of the drywall, searching for the weakest point. I backed away until my shoulders hit my closet door. My phone buzzed again. "Ask me something." It was insane how conversational it sounded. Like the intruder wasn't trying to break in so much as trying to train me to respond. I didn't answer. I didn't text. I just stood there, shaking, listening to the wall because the only thing worse than the tapping was when it stopped, and I had to wonder where it went. After a minute, the building's heat kicked on and the pipes in the wall began to ping, and for a brief moment the normal mechanical noise blended with the tapping in a way that made the tapping harder to isolate. That felt intentional too, like the building was providing cover. The taps moved lower, closer to the baseboard, then paused. A soft scraping sound followed, as if something metal brushed against a stud. Then from inside the wall, I heard a low sound that wasn't tapping at all, breathing faint and steady like someone resting their face near a small opening. My eyes snapped to the air vent near the floor. The vent cover was screwed in place, but the lower right screw looked slightly out of alignment, as if it had been loosened and tightened too many times. I crouched and stared at it. The vent rattled, once very gently, like someone on the other side had touched it. My phone buzzed again, and this time it wasn't a text. It was a facilities alert airflow. Anomaly detected, room 3XX. The room number on the alert was mine. The timestamp was 1 minute ahead of the clock on my lock screen, like the system was always reporting my fear before I could. I called campus police again, and the call went through, but the audio kept warping my own voice, breaking into fragments as if someone was pinching the line. I forced the words out anyway. Someone is in the wall. Someone is knocking from inside my wall, and I think they're using the vents. The dispatcher asked if I could see anyone. I laughed once, a sharp, ugly sound, because what I wanted to say was, no, I can only hear them breathe through the building like it's a body. Officers said they'd come. While I waited, the tapping resumed, but now it wasn't near my bed. It was behind my desk, then behind my closet, then in the wall, near the door, like it was moving through the room's perimeter, without ever stepping into the room. I realized with a sick clarity that I wasn't dealing with a single hidden spot. I was dealing with a path. A route, a way to travel through the dorm's guts, without using the hallways, without triggering cameras, without leaving footprints on linoleum. The tapping stopped directly beside my door, inside the wall, close enough that when it came again, it sounded like it was hitting the door frame from the inside. One tap, pause, one tap, pause, then a new sound, the soft click of my lock reader, waking up, but the reader didn't beep, denial, or acceptance. It just stayed awake, blinking, like it sensed proximity. The gap under my door darkened as a shadow approached from the hallway side, but before the shadow fully blocked the light, the tapping inside the wall changed into something else entirely. A slow, dragging scrape, as if something long and flexible was being pulled through a narrow space. I backed away from the door and grabbed my phone in both hands. My screen lit with a message from the unknown number. You moved again. Then, as if to prove it, the wall behind me gave a soft thud, not a tap, but a bump like someone had leaned their shoulder into it. The closet door rattled. I spun, and the air vent cover near the floor shifted outward by a fraction of an inch, the metal flexing, as if pressure had been applied from behind. For a second, the vent gap widened just enough to show darkness that felt too deep for a normal duct. I held my breath and stared at that thin black line. Something moved behind it, slow and close, and then a voice came through the vent, distorted by metal, low and calm speaking, like it was right beside my ear. Ask me something. The words crawled across my skin. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just stood there while the vent cover settled back into place perfectly still, as if it had never moved. When officers arrived, they checked the hallway and found nothing. They came into my room, listened to the wall, heard the normal heat ping, and for a minute I saw disbelief flicker in their faces. Then the wall tapped. Once one clean knuckle-like tap right where I pointed, and both officers went quiet. One of them radioed maintenance immediately. No answer. He asked if the dorm had crawl spaces. He asked if the building had accessible ductwork. He asked questions that sounded like someone trying to catch up to a reality he didn't want to name. They opened my vent cover. The screws came out too easily, like they'd been handled recently. Behind the cover, the duct looked normal at first glance. Dusty metal, a faint draft, the smell of old air. Then the officer's flashlight beam caught something wedged deeper inside, just beyond easy reach. A strip of painter's tape folded into a tiny flag. The officer used a pen to hook it and pull it out. On the tape, in the same neat black marker, was my room number again, and beneath it, a simple instruction: listen better. The officers told me to leave the dorm for the remainder of break. Housing told me they didn't have authority to relocate me off campus. Campus police told me they could escort me to a different building for the night. Everyone told me something that sounded like help, but was really just a way to move me somewhere else so the building could reset. I packed anyway, hands shaking, and when I lifted my pillow, I found a single plastic fork underneath it, tines facing upward like a warning, like a smile, like a signature that said the walls didn't need doors to get to me, and they never had. I was ready to leave after the fork under my pillow, but leaving turned out to be its own trap, because the moment you try to step out of the pattern, someone shows up to guide you right back into it. Housing told me they could place me temporarily in a guest room in a different dorm, and campus police offered to escort me across the quad. It was early evening, still light enough that the snow outside looked harmless, and for a few minutes I almost felt ridiculous for being afraid of a building in daylight. I packed a backpack with essentials, laptop, charger, toiletries, the screenshots of alerts, the printed access logs I'd begged an officer to give me, and I stood by my door waiting for the escort. The hallway felt too clean, like a set after the actors have gone home. Then came a knock. Not 3 polite taps this time. A firm, professional knock, the kind that says, "I belong here." "Campus security," a man's voice said. "Open up, please." My stomach tightened, because campus police had told me they were sending officers, not security, and they'd told me they'd announce themselves by name. I didn't move. The knock came again, followed by a tone that was almost patient. "Ma'am, I'm here to walk you down. It's cold out. Let's not make this harder." I stepped closer to the peephole towel and lifted the edge, just enough to see. In the hallway stood a man in a dark uniform jacket with reflective stripes, a knit cap pulled low, and a lanyard badge hanging at chest level. He looked official in the way a costume looks official from far away. Up close, through the peephole, details were wrong. The patch on his shoulder was slightly off-center. The badge photo looked too glossy, like it had been printed at a drugstore kiosk. His radio was clipped to his chest, but the earpiece wire didn't run anywhere. He smiled up at the peephole, as if he knew I was watching. "I know you've had some issues," he said, and the way he said issues made my skin crawl. "I'm going to get you out of here," I asked through the door. "What's your name?" There was a pause, short but real, like he hadn't expected to be asked. "Miller," he said, then quickly added, "Officer Miller. Campus security." Campus security didn't have officers in this town. They had guards, and campus police had officers. It was a small semantic thing, but at this point semantics were the only place truth still leaked through. I said, "My escort is campus police." His smile widened slightly, like I had confirmed something he wanted. "They asked me to meet you," he said smoothly. "They're tied up. I'm already here. Let's go." I didn't answer. I called campus police again with my phone pressed to my ear. The line rang. In the hallway, Miller tilted his head as if he could hear the ring through the door. "Don't do that," he said softly, still smiling. "They're busy." I kept the call going. The dispatcher answered, and I whispered, "There's a security guard outside my door." I didn't request him. "Is he with you?" The dispatcher asked for a description. I described the uniform and the name, Miller. There was a pause on the line that felt like a cliff edge. "We did not send anyone by that name," she said, and every hair on my arms rose. In the hallway, Miller's smile didn't change, but his eyes hardened, and I hated that I could see it even through the peephole distortion. "You're making a problem," he said, still polite. "Open the door." "We can do this easy." I told the dispatcher he was still there. She told me to keep the door locked and officers were on the way. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Miller leaned closer to the peephole, and his voice dropped into something more intimate, like a whisper meant only for me. "You really think they can protect you in a building that listens?" My stomach lurched. He shouldn't have known about the wall knocking. He shouldn't have known about the vents. Unless he was the same presence wearing a different face, or unless someone inside the system had been feeding him every report I'd made. He tapped his badge, lightly with a finger, making a small plastic click. "I can get you out," he repeated slower, as if I was the one being unreasonable. Then he did something that made my blood go cold. He recited my room number perfectly without looking at the door. "Room 318, he said, and then corrected himself with a quiet chuckle. "No, sorry. You moved. 3. He stopped, like he'd caught himself sharing too much. He smiled again, and the smile finally lost its friendliness. It's hard to keep up when you keep moving. I backed away from the door phone still to my ear, and I heard the soft electronic chirp of my lock reader waking up. It chirped again. Then a clean acceptance tone sounded. My deadbolt was thrown, but the latch clicked, like someone had just proven access anyway. The dispatcher asked if the door was being forced. I stared at the handle, waiting for it to turn. It didn't. Instead, Miller stepped back and spoke in a louder performative voice meant for any camera that might be watching. "Okay," he said, "I'm going to document that you refused assistance." He pulled out a small notepad and pen. The pen scratched across paper. He was building a fake record. He was creating the illusion of procedure the same way the building created alerts. 1 minute ahead, the same way the cameras looped empty hallways. Then he held the notepad up toward my door as if I could see it. "Sign here," he said. "Just crack the door and sign. That's all." It was so simple and so dangerous that my throat tightened. Crack the door. Just enough for a hand to slip in. Just enough for a wedge. Just enough for the deadbolt to become irrelevant. I told him no. His smile vanished completely. For the first time, his voice sharpened, not loud, but edged. "Don't be stupid," he said. Then he went back to polite again, in the same breath, like flipping a switch. "It's cold. I don't want you to get hurt." He glanced down the hallway, and I followed his gaze through the peephole. The end of the hall was empty. No officers. No flashing lights. No backup. Just fluorescent hum and closed doors. Miller stepped closer to the janitor closet across from me and placed his hand on its handle. The closet was supposed to be locked. He opened it smoothly like he had a key. He reached inside and pulled out a folded reflective vest, the kind campus police sometimes wore at night, and he draped it over his arm like a prop. Then he pulled out something else, a key ring that clinked softly. Real keys. More than one. He held them up at chest level so the peephole would catch the glint. "I can do this with keys," he said quietly. "Or we can do it the easy way." I told the dispatcher he had keys and was threatening entry. She said officers were 2 minutes out. 2 minutes felt like a lifetime in a hallway where someone had already opened a locked closet like it was their own. Miller sighed, the first sign of impatience. He leaned in close to my door and whispered, "You know what's funny? You keep calling the wrong people." Then he straightened, took 2 steps back, and pointed his radio at his mouth as if he was about to speak into it. The radio stayed silent. No crackle. No reply. He lowered it, smiled again, and in a calm voice said, "They won't show." A second later, the hallway lights dimmed on their timer, plunging the corridor into a grey half-light that made the shadows deeper. In that dimness, Miller's badge caught the fluorescent glow and flashed too bright, like a mirror angled wrong. He stepped sideways just out of the peephole's direct view, and I lost him. The silence stretched. Then, from the wall beside my bed, the tapping started again. 3 taps, pause. 3 taps like a metronome, reminding me the building and the man were part of the same rhythm. I heard boots in the hallway, and relief punched through me until I realized the boots were approaching from the wrong direction. They stopped, right outside my door. A different voice called out campus police. I rushed to the peephole and saw 2 real officers, flashlights up, scanning. Miller was nowhere. The janitor closet was shut. The hallway looked empty and normal again, like a reset button had been pressed. I opened the door only when the officers gave their names. I told them everything, fast, stumbling over words, pointing at the closet, describing the badge, the keys, the way he almost said my new room number. The officers checked their radios, checked the floor, checked the stairwell. Nothing. One officer tried the janitor closet. Locked. He asked how I knew it had been opened. I told him I watched it. He nodded slowly, then asked the building supervisor on the radio for a list of security personnel assigned that night. The reply came back clean and flat. There were no private security guards on duty in this dorm over break. No Miller. No one assigned to my building other than campus police patrols. The officer looked at me and said something that made my mouth go dry. "Our system shows you were escorted out of your room 5 minutes ago." I stared at him. "I never left," I said. He showed me his tablet. It displayed an incident log entry with my name and a signature line that looked like a messy scribble. The timestamp on it was 313 a.m. The same time everything always happened. The officer's eyes narrowed. "That's not your signature, is it?" I shook my head and my hand started to shake so hard I couldn't hold my phone steady. The building had created a record of me leaving with a man who didn't exist, and it had filed it like paperwork like that could make it true. Back inside, the officers searched my room, checked the vents, checked the window, checked the wall where the tapping had come from. They found nothing. But when one officer stepped toward my desk, his boot nudged something on the carpet. A small plastic fork, clean, new, placed neatly with the tines pointing toward the door. And on my phone a final text arrived from the unknown number, perfectly timed as the officers stared at the fork. Signet and escorted. After the fake escort and the forged signet and escorted log entry, the officers stopped treating me like a nervous student and started treating me like a witness in a case they couldn't officially name. They didn't say the word intruder anymore, because that implied a normal entry point. They said, unauthorized presence access, anomaly, system mismatch. They told me housing would audit master keys and reset permissions. Housing told me they would review procedures and reminded me politely that I still had to follow dorm policy. The building, meanwhile, continued doing what it had been doing all week, writing its own story 1 minute ahead of me, making doors obey when they felt like it, making cameras show emptiness when a person was very clearly not absent. I tried to keep my life small. I stopped going to the basement entirely. I stopped going to common areas. I ate vending machine snacks and instant noodles and drank water like it was a privilege. I showered during daylight hours, only with my phone in a plastic bag, because I refused to be alone with my thoughts in a room full of echoing tile. But the building didn't care about my schedule. It had its own. By the time I decided to take a shower on the third-floor bathroom, it was still early enough to pretend I was making a safe choice. The hallway lights were fully bright. The radiator hiss sounded ordinary. I could hear distant doors closing on another floor, which told me at least one staff member was somewhere in the building doing something legitimate. I grabbed my caddy and towel and checked my phone. 2:54 p.m. Safe time. Normal time. I walked to the communal bathroom, with my keys threaded between my fingers, like that would matter. And I told myself I was done being afraid of the mundane. The bathroom was empty, all stalls open, all sinks dry, the mirror reflecting fluorescent light too harshly. I chose the shower stall farthest from the door, so no one could casually glance in. And I turned the water on hot enough to steam, because for once I wanted to feel something that wasn't adrenaline. As the room filled with fog, the building made the water sound bigger than it was. The spray on tile turned into a roar in that small space, a white noise wall that could hide anything. I hated that thought, but I couldn't stop it from arriving. I kept my eyes on the floor, on the drain, on the edge of the curtain where it met the tile. I washed fast. I didn't hum. I didn't close my eyes. I kept the curtain slightly parted at the bottom so I could see if a shadow approached. Halfway through rinsing shampoo, I heard the bathroom door open. Normally the sound would have been obvious over the shower, but the building had taught me to hear through noise. This was a specific sound. The heavy hinge sigh, the latch releasing, and then the soft click of the lock re-engaging behind someone. I paused, letting the water run, and listened. Footsteps crossed the tile. Slow, not rushed, like whoever came in belonged there. I told myself it could be a student, staffer, a cleaner maintenance. It was daytime. Then I heard the sound that made my scalp tighten a keyring. Not the jingle of a student's lanyard. Metal keys, touching metal keys, controlled, professional. The footsteps stopped near the row of stalls. I watched the gap beneath the curtain. No shadow passed. Whoever it was didn't walk directly up to my stall like a person would. They paused as if they were reading something, maybe a clipboard, maybe a list. Then the shower room light flickered once, and in that half-second of dimness I saw my own reflection in the fogged mirror, across the room distort like a smear, and the thought hit me. I can't see the door from here. I can't see the sink area. I can't see what is between me and the exit. The footsteps moved again closer and stopped directly in front of my stall. A shadow bloomed at the bottom edge of the curtain, thick and steady. A hand reached down and gripped the curtain's outer edge, not yanking it open, just holding it as if testing how much resistance it would give. My mouth went dry. I forced my voice to come out loud over the water. "Hello," I said. "Occupied." A man's voice answered calm and flat, the kind of tone people use when they're at work and your existence is an inconvenience. "Maintenance," he said. "We've got a report." I didn't ask report of what, because the fear already knew the answer. They always had a report. The building always created a report 1 minute ahead. "Come back later," I said. "I'm in here." The man sighed, as if I'd asked him to do something unreasonable. "We need to check the valve," he replied. "It won't take long." The curtain edge tightened in his grip. He didn't sound embarrassed. He didn't sound like he cared. He sounded like he expected compliance because he had keys. "No," I said, sharper. "Leave." The hand released the curtain slowly, and for a second I thought that was it. Then I heard the stall door handle move. My stall had a flimsy latch, not a deadbolt, the kind of cheap hardware that depends on social contract more than security. The handle rattled once, twice. I reached with wet fingers and grabbed the latch from inside, pressing it in place. "I said leave," I shouted, and the sound echoed like a different person. The man didn't answer. Instead, the latch loosened under my fingers, not because I let go, but because something on the outside shifted the mechanism. There was a faint click, small and precise, like a key turning in a lock that wasn't supposed to have one. My heart slammed. A master key. A bypass. The stall door swung inward 2 inches and stopped against my shoulder because I was braced there, naked and dripping, holding the edge of the door with all my strength. Steam rolled out into the larger bathroom like breath escaping a mouth. Through the crack, I saw a sliver of him dark work jacket, a reflective stripe, gloved hands. No face yet. He pushed gently, not forcing like he knew he could wait until my grip weakened. "It's okay," he said, and that phrase, in that situation, made me feel physically ill. "I've done this 100 times. I screamed, then not words, just a raw sound, meant to break the building's spell of professionalism. The man paused. The door stopped pushing. In the gap beneath the curtain, his shadow didn't retreat. He stayed there, and I realized the scream hadn't scared him. It had just reset his patience. He spoke again, softer, like he didn't want to be overheard. "You're the one making this weird," he said. The sentence was ridiculous. Me naked behind a curtain, him using a key to open a stall, yet he said it like he believed it. Like he could rewrite reality with tone. My phone was in the plastic bag on the hook outside the stall. Outside. I couldn't reach it without letting go. I grabbed my towel from the shelf inside and wrapped it around my waist, with shaking hands, never letting my body stop blocking the door. "Back up," I said through clenched teeth. "I'm calling police." The man made a small sound that might have been a laugh. Then, very lightly, he tapped something against the stall door plastic on metal. "A card. A badge." "They already know," he said. "They told us to check." The stall door pushed again another inch. I shoved back hard, and the cheap hinge squealed. The squeal finally made him pause, not because it hurt his ears, but because squeals travel. They carry. They create witnesses. The man stopped pushing. For 3 long seconds, nothing moved. The shower water kept blasting steady and indifferent. Then the stall door eased backward on its own, as if he let it return to closed position. A small click sounded at the latch, like he relocked it from the outside. My stomach dropped because it meant he could lock me in as easily as he could let himself in. The footsteps retreated across tile, still unhurried. The keyring jingled once. The bathroom door opened and shut. Silence. I stood there, shaking so badly, my teeth chattered not from cold but from the sudden vacuum left behind when adrenaline has nowhere to go. I turned the shower off and listened for the building to fill the quiet with something else. Elevator, ding, vent, hum, hallway footsteps. Instead, my phone buzzed faintly from the hook outside the stall, muffled by plastic. A facilities alert. I stepped out, grabbed it, and read the notification. Maintenance entry. Floor 3, plumbing, access. 13 p.m. I looked at the clock on my lock screen. Uch oniki PM, 1 minute behind again. My skin went cold. The system hadn't just logged a maintenance visit. It had predicted it. I ran out of the bathroom with my towel clutched tight and my caddy half spilling, and I nearly collided with an actual campus police officer in the hallway. He looked startled to see me barefoot and shaking. "We got an alert about a disturbance," he said. "Are you okay?" I told him. What happened in broken sentences. His expression hardened. He walked me back to the bathroom, checked every stall, checked the sinks, checked the closet. Empty. He radioed dispatch to locate any maintenance staff assigned to the building that day. The reply came back. No scheduled maintenance. No work orders. No plumbing checks. The officer stared at the stall latch. It was still in the locked position. "How did he lock this from outside?" he muttered. He knelt, examined the latch, and found a tiny scratch on the metal, fresh, clean, like a tool had been inserted. He asked me, which stall? I pointed. He asked if I saw his face. I hadn't. I only saw gloves and a jacket and the certainty of someone with keys. The officer walked me back to my room and told me to stay there, while he checked the janitor closet again. When he returned 10 minutes later, he held up a small object, pinched between 2 fingers, a key blank. Not a full key, just a cut piece of metal with no plastic head, the kind people keep on rings for utility doors. "Found it on the floor by the bathroom," he said. Freshly dropped. My throat tightened. Whoever it was had been close enough to drop something and still leave without being seen. Back in my room, I locked my door and sat on the bed, still damp, still smelling like cheap soap and fear. I opened my screenshots folder and saw something I hadn't noticed before. On the forged escort log, the scribbled signature line, the one that wasn't mine, had a small shape at the end, like a hook. It looked like a lowercase r, or maybe a number. I zoomed in until the pixels blurred. It wasn't a letter. It was a tiny drawing of a fork. That night, when I finally fell asleep from exhaustion, I dreamed of a stall door opening 2 inches over and over, while a calm voice kept saying, "It's okay, I've done this 100 times." And every time the door cracked, the bright, sterile elevator light spilled through instead of bathroom light. Because the building wanted me to understand something simple. Keys were not the threat. Access was. And access belonged to whoever the building decided to recognize. I didn't hear from my RA for days after winter break started, which I assumed was normal. People go home, people turn off their phones, people stop being responsible for other people's problems. Then the morning after the shower incident, my RA texted me from a number I didn't have saved. No greeting. No, are you okay? Just don't talk about it in the building. I stared at the message until my eyes burned, because it sounded like the unknown number that kept texting me, except the bubble had her name at the top. I typed back, "Are you on campus?" She didn't answer right away. 10 minutes later, meet me in the lobby at 200. Daylight. Cameras. Public space. It sounded safe, which made it suspicious. I still went because at this point my decisions were all variations of bad, and at least meeting her meant information. I sat on the lobby couch, with my backpack on my lap, like a shield. The front desk lights were dim. The glass doors looked out onto the snow-bright quad. A few minutes after 2, my RA walked in from the stairwell, not from outside. She was wearing the same sweatshirt she always wore during rounds, hood down, hair pulled back, tight face pale like she hadn't slept. She didn't sit beside me. She stood in front of me and kept her eyes moving, scanning the corners, the ceiling, the hallway that led to the elevators. "You're still here," she said, like it wasn't a choice anyone should make. I told her about the shower stall, about the key blank, about the maintenance alert, time-stamped at 313, even though it happened at 312. She didn't look surprised. She looked exhausted. "I told housing not to leave anyone alone in this building," she said quietly. They didn't listen. I asked her if she knew anything about the forged escort record. She swallowed. "Yeah," she said. "Because it happened last year." My stomach tightened. "What happened last year?" I asked. She glanced at the lobby camera above the front desk and lowered her voice. "We called it a crawler," she said, and the word sounded ridiculous, until she explained it. Someone who doesn't use doors. Someone who moves through the spaces. You don't think about ceilings, maintenance, chases, ducts. They're not supposed to connect the way they do, but old buildings, they have roots. I felt my hands go cold. "A person?" I asked. Not some rumor," she nodded once. "A person," she said. "We found signs. Food wrappers, forks, tape, a copied master key, a roster sheet. Same stuff you're seeing." The fork detail punched through me like a confirmation stamp. "Why wasn't it shut down?" I demanded, louder than I meant to. Her eyes widened and she hissed, "Not here." Then she sat, finally leaning forward with her elbows on her knees, like she was telling me something she could get in trouble for knowing. "Housing wrote it up as unhoused trespasser," she said. "Campus police wrote it up as no suspect located. Maintenance said they sealed access points. And then the cameras stopped catching anything. And the next semester people moved back in, and the noise covered it." I asked her why she was telling me now. She looked at my backpack, and then at me. "Because you're doing the one thing that makes it worse," she said. "You keep giving it feedback." I stared at her. Feedback. She nodded toward my phone. "You call, you film, you report, you react," she said. "It learns your patterns." I wanted to argue what was I supposed to do, pretend it wasn't happening. But the truth was, the building always escalated right after I tried to create proof. "So what do I do?" I asked. My RA's face tightened. "You leave," she said. "Today. Not tonight. Not after you pack slowly. You leave while it's light. You don't go back upstairs alone. You don't shower. You don't go to the basement. You don't follow footprints like you're in a story." Her words stung because they were accurate and because they sounded like someone who had already watched this happen to someone else. I asked, "Why crawler?" She didn't answer immediately. She watched the elevator doors. "Because that's what it sounds like," she said finally. "At night, when it moves," she pointed upward toward the lobby ceiling tiles. "You hear it above you like a slow drag, like elbows on plywood. People think it's pipes until it stops right over their bed." My skin prickled. I imagined the tapping beside my headboard, the vent shifting the breath on metal. "How does it get keys?" I asked. "It doesn't need keys," she said, voice flat. "Keys, just make it faster." Then she pulled something from her pocket, a small folded square of painter's tape. My stomach dropped before I even saw the ink. She placed it on the table between us. On it, in neat black marker, was my current room number of my new one, written with a little fork symbol beside it, like a bullet point. My mouth went dry. "Where did you get that?" I whispered. Her eyes flicked to the stairwell again. "It was on my door this morning," she said. "Inside my RA mailbox slot. Like someone knew exactly where to put it so only I'd see." My heart hammered. "Are you sure this is you?" I asked, because my mind needed a normal explanation, like a drowning person needs air. She shook her head. "I'm sure it's not housing," she said. "Housing doesn't draw forks." I stared at the tape. The ink looked fresh. "Why me?" I asked, and the question came out smaller than I meant it to. She exhaled, slowly. "Because you're here," she said. "Because you're alone. Because you notice." Then she leaned closer and said the part that has stayed with me more than any footprint or door click. "It wants you to open something." I asked what she meant. She glanced at the lobby's locked maintenance door near the front desk, the one marked staff only. Last year, she said the only time we almost caught it was when a student did something stupid. He heard noises above his room in the study lounge area, and he climbed up to check ceiling tiles himself. He opened a tile that had been sitting wrong all semester, and when he opened it, he found the root. She paused, jaw clenched, and the root found him. My throat tightened. "Did he die?" I asked, because horror always tries to jump to that word. She shook her head. "No," she said, "but he disappeared for 12 minutes. The cameras showed him walking into the lounge. They never showed him leaving. Then he walked out of the stairwell, like he'd been escorted, confused, holding a fork in his hand like it had been placed there. And campus police logged him as cleared and escorted, even though no one escorted him. My blood went cold, because it matched my forged log perfectly. I stared at my RA, and for a second I couldn't tell if she was warning me or repeating a script the building had written for her. "How do I know you're real right now?" I asked quietly. Her eyes snapped to mine, hurt, flashing for an instant. "Because I'm scared too," she said. "And because I'm telling you to leave, not to stay." She stood abruptly. "Go pack," she said. "I'll come with an officer. We'll get you out." I stood 2 backpack straps tight in my hands. "Wait," I said. "What if it follows?" She looked at the lobby doors, then back at me. "It doesn't follow people," she said, and her voice sounded like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. "It follows spaces. It follows access." Then she did something that made my stomach twist. She reached out and tapped my phone screen with her fingertip right over the time display, like she was checking whether it would change. The time read 2:58 p.m. Her finger lingered. "If you hear it," she said, "don't answer it. Don't talk to it through walls. Don't ask it questions. Don't negotiate." She started walking toward the stairwell, then turned back and added almost as an afterthought, "And if anyone knocks and says they're here to help, don't open. Not even a crack." She left through the stairwell door, and the lobby felt suddenly larger, emptier, like her presence had been the only thing holding it together. My phone buzzed in my hand before I even moved. A text from the unknown number. "RA talks too much." I felt my knees go weak. I stared at the stairwell door she'd just gone through, waiting for it to open again. Waiting for her to come back and tell me it was a prank. Waiting for proof she wasn't part of it. Instead, my phone lit with a facilities alert. Ceiling tile disturbance detected. Study lounge. Timestamp. 3:13 p.m. The lobby clock above the front desk still read 3, 1, 2. I ran to the elevator, then stopped because I remembered the elevator was part of the routine. I ran to the stairs instead, taking them 2 at a time, and the entire climb I heard a sound above me through the stairwell ceiling. A slow drag, like elbows on plywood moving in the same direction I was going, staying directly overhead. When I reached my floor, the hallway looked normal, but the study lounge door at the end was cracked open just slightly, and the fluorescent light inside flickered like a dying pulse. I stood there breathing hard, and from inside the lounge came the faintest sound, a soft scrape followed by a single tap on metal, like a fork, placed carefully on a table. Then, from somewhere above the lounge ceiling, something shifted its weight and the ceiling tile above the doorway bowed downward by a fraction of an inch, as if something on top of it had leaned closer to listen. I backed away slowly because my RA had been right. It didn't need to chase me. It only needed me to open the wrong thing. And as I retreated, the unknown number sent one more message that landed like a hand on my neck. "Open it." The message that said "open it" sat on my screen like a dare, and I hated how much my body reacted to a single sentence. The study lounge door was cracked, just enough to leak a thin wedge of light into the hallway, and the ceiling tile above the doorway bowed down the smallest amount, like something heavy had shifted its weight to get closer. I didn't go in. I didn't reach for the handle. I remembered what my RA said. It wanted me to open something, so I backed away slow, and I called campus police from the stairwell, so my voice wouldn't echo into the hall like an invitation. Dispatch told me officers were already en route because of the ceiling tile disturbance alert. That phrase, disturbance, made it sound like the building itself was filing a complaint, like the dorm was the victim and I was the noise. I waited on the landing with my phone in my palm and my backpack still on my shoulder because I couldn't make myself put it down. Above me, through the stairwell ceiling, I heard that slow drag again, elbows on plywood moving in small bursts, as if whatever was up there had learned how to travel without making the kind of sound people expect. The officers arrived within minutes, but time in that building never behaved normally, so it felt like an hour and a second at the same time. 2 uniformed campus police came up the stairs, faces serious, flashlights up. My RA came with them. Hoodie pulled tight eyes, scanning the corners like she expected the walls to blink. She didn't look at me like a student anymore. She looked at me like a person who had seen the same pattern repeat and couldn't afford to pretend it was new. "Don't touch the door," she said immediately before I even spoke, and the fact she said it first made my throat go dry. One officer asked me to stay behind them. The other took out a small extendable baton, not for fighting, I realized, but to poke and lift things without using his hands. They approached the study lounge door as if it might swing open by itself. The crack in the door hadn't changed. The light inside still flickered like a tired pulse. The officer announced loud enough to be heard by anyone inside, and by any camera that might be pretending to record campus police. "If anyone is in there, identify yourself." No answer. The silence wasn't empty silence. It was listening silence. The officer pushed the door open with the baton careful, and the lounge revealed itself in a wash of fluorescent light and old carpet smell. It looked normal at first. Couches, a coffee table, a couple of dorm-issued chairs, a bulletin board with curling flyers. But the air felt wrong, stale and warm, like a closet that had been shut with a person inside. On the coffee table sat a plastic fork, clean tines pointing toward the door like it had been placed to mark a boundary. My RA swore under her breath. One officer stepped in flashlight, beam sweeping the corners, and the other stayed near the doorway, watching the ceiling. The tile above the door had shifted more than I'd noticed from the hall. One edge sat lower, the grid slightly bent, as if it had been pressed down repeatedly. The officer extended the baton and tapped the tile once. The sound was hollow and too close, like knocking on a thin box. Tap, tap, nothing. Then so softly, I thought it was my imagination, the tile tapped back from above. One clean tap, slightly delayed, perfectly centered over the officer's tap like a response. Both officers froze. My RA's face went pale. The officer tried again harder. Tap, a pause. Tap back. A third tap came, and this time the tile didn't just answer it. Flexed, bowing downward a fraction. Like whatever was on top had shifted closer to the grid, putting weight on it. The officer's flashlight beam slid along the tile's edge and caught something dark in the seam, not dust. Fabric. A small strip of cloth wedged between tile and frame, as if someone had stuffed it there to stop rattling or to mark a spot. The officer used the baton to lift the tile just an inch. It rose reluctantly, like it had adhesive in places. The moment the gap opened, a smell poured out, hot dust, old insulation, sweat, and something faintly sweet like stale energy drink. The smell of someone living where they weren't supposed to. The officer held the tile up and angled his flashlight into the cavity. For a second, all I saw was darkness and pipes, and the skeletal bones of the building. Then the beam caught, cardboard laid flat like flooring. A crushed water bottle. A cluster of plastic forks, piled like tiny white bones, and a set of eyes. Not a face, just eyes reflecting light from far back in the void, low and still like an animal in a crawlspace. The officer inhaled sharply. The tile jerked upward from above like something grabbed it, and the flashlight beam bounced. The officer pushed up harder with the baton, and the tile lifted enough that I saw more a sleeping bag, shoved into a corner, a rolled-up hoodie, and a laminated badge, hanging from a string, swaying slightly like it had been disturbed. The eyes vanished. A scrape sounded overhead, fast, urgent elbows and knees on plywood, and the entire ceiling grid trembled in a ripple as something moved away across the tiles. The officer shouted, "Stop campus police," and thrust the baton upward again, lifting a second tile, adjacent to the first, trying to follow. The movement overhead accelerated a low sliding rush that traveled deeper into the building's ceiling like a wave. The lounge lights flickered hard twice, and the camera in the corner of the room, the one I hadn't even noticed, made a soft mechanical click like it was resetting. My RA grabbed my arm and pulled me back instinctively, not because the ceiling could fall, but because she understood something about the route up there. It could drop down anywhere. The officer switched to his radio and called for additional units, and his voice crackled in the lounge like it was being swallowed and spit back out. The other officer ran to the lounge's maintenance closet door and yanked on it. Locked. He tried his master key. Denied. He swore softly, then tried again, and the lock accepted with a clean chirp, as if the building had decided to cooperate for a second to make the scene feel legitimate. He flung the closet open and aimed his flashlight inside. It was full of folding chairs and cleaning supplies, and at the very back, a ceiling access panel with a little latch. He reached up, flipped it, and the panel dropped open with a dusty sigh. A ladder was mounted inside. The officer started to climb, and my RA hissed, "No sharp," and grabbed his sleeve. "Don't go in after it," she said. "That's what it wants." The officer stared at her, then at the dark opening above the ladder, then made a decision that looked like swallowing pride. He backed down, and instead directed his flashlight into the opening. The beam caught a narrow corridor of ductwork and cables, and then disappeared into darkness. Somewhere above, a slow scrape stopped abruptly, and for a second the building went still, as if it was holding its breath. Then from deep in the ceiling, a voice drifted down low and calm, as if it was right above us. "Open it wider." The words were not shouted. They were intimate, like a suggestion, like a training cue. The officer snapped his flashlight beam around, searching for a body that wasn't there. My RA squeezed my arm so hard it hurt. My phone buzzed. A facilities alert. Ceiling access. Open study lounge. Timestamp. 3:1 p.m. The lobby clock on the wall outside the lounge, visible through the doorway, read 3:12. The officer cursed and slammed the closet panel shut. The moment it closed, the lounge lights stabilized. The air felt less charged, and the silence returned, like a curtain dropping. The officers searched the lounge thoroughly. They bagged the forks, took photos of the cardboard flooring in the ceiling cavity, and tried to pull the sleeping bag out with the baton, but it slid away deeper into the darkness, as if someone tugged it from the other side. The eyes never returned. When they finally lowered the ceiling tile back into place, the grid settled with a tiny metallic click that sounded far too satisfied. My RA told the officers urgently that last year someone disappeared for 12 minutes after opening a tile, and one officer looked at the other and quietly said, "Check the logs." They pulled up their tablet. There it was again, a clean incident entry showing me cleared and escorted, timestamped 3:13, and a new line beneath it. Study. Lounge disturbance resolved. The officer stared at the screen and said, "We haven't resolved anything." His partner's radio crackled with a dispatch update. No additional units available. Low staffing due to break. The building, as if hearing that, let out a soft hiss through the vents, and the smell of hot dust returned faintly. My RA leaned close to me and whispered, "It's not just living up there. It's using it." The officers escorted me back to my room to pack, and they stayed in the hallway while I threw clothes into my backpack with shaking hands. I tried to keep my eyes off the vents, off the ceiling, off the crack under my door that had become my clock. When I zipped the bag, my phone buzzed with one more message from the unknown number. "You saw it. Don't pretend you didn't." As we walked back toward the stairs, the hallway lights dimmed on their timer, and in the grey half-light, I saw a ceiling tile above my own door sit slightly crooked, just enough to notice if you were trained to look. A faint dust line ran along its edge, disturbed recently, like fingers had pushed it up and set it back down. Above it from inside the ceiling came one soft tap, perfectly centered over my threshold, like a knock from the wrong side of the world. They finally got me out of the building before dark, not because anyone won a fight, but because daylight made the dorm less brave. Campus police escorted me to a temporary guest room in another dorm across the quad, a newer building with brighter lights and cameras that actually showed people moving. I told myself it was over the moment the old dorm disappeared behind trees and snowbanks, but fear doesn't end when you change addresses. It just looks for the nearest familiar pattern. The new dorm felt safer in obvious ways. There were other students around, a custodian pushing a cart, a lobby TV playing loud sports, highlights. Normal. Noise, human noise. Still, I kept checking my phone like it might show me a new alert 1 minute ahead, like time itself had become compromised. The guest room was small, clean, and sterile, a place meant for visiting faculty and overflow housing. I locked the door, set my backpack on the bed, and tried to breathe like a person who wasn't being hunted by architecture. Adno patruzech, shunulpo. I got a call from housing. The staffer sounded polite and tired, and said they needed me to confirm something. There had been a minor access issue with my original dorm room, and they wanted to make sure my belongings were secure. I said my belongings were in my backpack, and I wasn't going back. The staffer said, understood too smoothly, and the call ended. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You left your food. I stared at it, confused, because I hadn't ordered anything. Then another text. Came this one. From what looked like a delivery service. Short code. The kind you get for status updates. Your order is arriving. I didn't click any links. My stomach tightened anyway. I opened my bank app. No charges. I opened my email. No receipt. I went down to the lobby desk and asked if any food delivery was expected for my name. The desk worker glanced at a clipboard and said no. I went back upstairs and tried to ignore my phone. Atunci 11:50 și 8 p.m. A new notification appeared. Contactless delivery at your door. I sat up in bed, staring at my guest room door, because even in a different building, a door is still a door, and the sound of a knock is still a spell. I heard nothing for a long minute. Then at exactly 12:00 a.m., 3 taps landed on my door. Polity. Even. The same pattern. My skin went cold. A voice spoke through the wood, muffled but clear enough. Delivery. It was a young man's voice. Casual like this was routine. My mind tried to grab a rational explanation. Wrong room. Wrong building. A driver who got lost. I didn't move. Delivery. For he paused, and then said my name correctly. Not close. Correct. My stomach dropped. I didn't order anything. I called back, keeping my voice loud enough that if anyone in the hall was real, they might hear. The voice laughed, lightly. It's paid, he said. Just gotta hand it off. Can you open for a sec? I didn't. I stepped to the peephole, uncovered it, and looked. A man stood in the hallway holding a brown paper bag with a stapled receipt on it. He wore a hoodie and a beanie, and a lanyard hung around his neck. Not a delivery lanyard, just a plain strap. His face was partly shadowed by the harsh hallway light, but his stance was relaxed, patient. Too patient, like he could wait all night. Behind him, at the end of the hall, the elevator doors were closed and the hallway camera's little red indicator light was off. That detail hit me hard. Cameras in this building didn't have off modes that visible. The man followed my gaze and smiled up at the peephole as if he knew exactly what I was noticing. It's getting cold, he said gently. I don't want to leave it on the floor. He lifted the bag slightly, making the paper crinkle. The smell of fried food drifted faintly through the door seam, real enough to make my stomach twist in a different way. This wasn't just a prop. Either the building had resources, or whoever was doing this knew how to make the bait convincing. I called campus police non-emergency from my phone and whispered what was happening. The dispatcher asked if I could see a vehicle, a uniform, anything identifying. I told her. He just said delivery, and he knew my name. She told me not to open the door, and officers would respond. While she talked, the man outside knocked again. Same 3 taps. Hey, he said, voice still friendly. If you don't want it, just sign the receipt and I'll leave. Sign. The word made my throat close, because it matched the forged escort log, the notepad, the signature line. I didn't respond. The man sighed, and the friendliness thinned. They're gonna charge you if I take it back, he said. That's how it works. I almost laughed, because that's not how contactless delivery works, but fear makes you want to argue with the wrong details, as if winning a small fact check will protect you. Leave it in the lobby, I said instead. He tilted his head like I'd said something cute. Can't, he replied. It's assigned. Assigned. Another word that felt too precise. Like inventory. Like my room number on painter's tape. Open the door, he said, still calm. Then quieter. Or, I'll open it. My skin prickled. I watched his hands. One held the bag. The other lowered to his pocket. He didn't pull out a gun or a knife. He pulled out a keycard, black plastic, no visible logo. He tapped it against my door reader. My lock chirped. Denied. He tapped again. Denied. He tapped a third time slower, like he was listening to the tone. Then my lock made the clean acceptance beep, and the latch clicked. My deadbolt was thrown, but the fact the latch moved at all made my legs go weak. The dispatcher heard my breath hitch and asked what happened. I whispered, it accepted. The man outside smiled wider, as if the building had just performed on cue. See, he murmured. It's fine. He set the bag down, directly in front of my door. Careful, centered, like a ritual. Then he slid a pen and a little receipt slip under the door through the gap, pushing it gently until it stopped at my feet. I stared at it. The slip had my name printed on it. The total read $0. Ling Ling. In the signature line, someone had already drawn a tiny fork. The man tapped the door softly, not 3 knocks, just 1, like a reminder. Just sign, he said. Then I didn't touch the pen. I stepped back, phone pressed tight to my ear. The dispatcher told me to stay inside, and officers were arriving. Outside, the man's tone shifted into mild irritation, as if I was the problem customer. You're making this a thing, he said, and I felt sick because it echoed the maintenance voice from the shower stall. You know it's yours. It's right there. I didn't answer. I didn't move. In the hallway, the elevator dinged softly, and the bright sterile light spilled under my door in a thin band. The man didn't turn to look at the elevator. He was already in sync with it. I can wait, he said, almost bored. I'm getting paid either way. Then, very softly, he added, You like the sound of paper, don't you? I didn't understand until he crinkled the bag again, and the sound traveled through the door like a whisper. My phone buzzed with a facilities alert. This, in a different dorm, a different system. Door reader activity detected. Guest room. Time stamp. 313. I looked at my phone clock. It read 3, 1, 2. The old pattern had followed me here, not as a person, but as a rhythm. The dispatcher's voice tightened. Officers are on the floor, she said. Do not open. The man outside stepped back from the door and lifted his hand slightly, as if surrendering for any camera that might be watching now. Okay, he said loudly. Okay. Refuse delivery. Then he leaned close again, quiet enough that only I would hear. You'll still take it, he whispered. You always do. You always look. The hallway lights dimmed, and in the grey half-light, the bag on the floor looked like a small animal crouched at my threshold. I heard footsteps. Real footsteps. Approaching fast. A campus police officer's voice called out down the hall. Step away from the door. The man outside didn't run. He didn't argue. He simply moved sideways out of the people's view, and when the officer rounded the corner with his flashlight beam, the hallway was empty, except for the brown paper bag and the receipt slip under my door. The officer knocked, identified himself by name, and I opened the door only after he said it twice. He picked up the bag carefully like it might bite. The staple receipt attached to it had my name printed in clean block letters, and an address line that read, My old dorm building, not this one. As if the order had been routed through the wrong reality. Inside the bag was not food. It was empty, except for a single plastic fork, and a strip of painter's tape folded into a neat square. The officer unfolded the tape and went still. On it, in black marker, was my guest room number, and beneath it, still here. My phone buzzed one more time. Unknown number. Did you like it hot or cold? The officer asked if I wanted to file a formal report. I said yes, because I was done worrying about sounding crazy. He took photos of the tape and the fork and the empty bag. Then he checked the camera at the end of the hall. The feed showed the hallway bright and empty, looping smoothly from 305 to 320 with no interruption. No delivery driver. No officer. No me opening the door. Just fluorescent hum and stillness like a screensaver. The officer looked at the loop and swallowed hard. This doesn't make sense, he said quietly. From the vent above the hallway, barely audible, came a faint scrape, like something shifting its weight in the ceiling, just out of sight, settling in for the night. and somewhere deep in the building an elevator dinged at 313A. Exactly as if time itself was being called to my floor from inside the car. I left my guest room for 7 minutes, and when I came back, the door was already unlocked, like the building had decided locks were just suggestions. After the delivery bag incident, campus police stayed on the floor for a while, walking the hallway, checking doors, radioing in what they could actually verify: the empty paper bag, the fork, the painter's tape, with my room number, and still here, written under it. They took photos and told me they'd increase patrols, the same sentence I'd heard in the old dorm, only this time it came with a tighter jaw and less confidence. I watched the officer try to access the end of hall camera feed again. Watched the loop play back a perfect still hallway that erased everything that mattered. And I saw something change in his face that looked like fatigue turning into fear. He told me to keep my door deadbolted, to call if I heard anything, and to avoid being alone in common areas. When he left, the hallway felt too quiet again, even in a dorm that still had people in it, because quiet isn't about noise. It's about whether you feel witnessed. I locked my guest room door, threw the deadbolt, and sat on the bed with my backpack on my lap like a life jacket. I told myself the new building was different. Newer wiring, better cameras, more traffic, no crawl spaces that connected like old veins. But at 3:13 a.m., the elevator dinged somewhere below, and I felt my stomach clench the same way it always did, because even if the building was different, the rhythm had arrived. I stayed awake until dawn, then slept in fragments, waking every time someone walked past my door, every time a pipe pinged, every time my phone vibrated with nothing. By mid-morning, I was out of water, and dehydration has a way of making fear feel theatrical, so I decided to do the normal thing. Walk to the vending area on the floor below and buy a bottle. I checked my lock twice before leaving. I tested the deadbolt. I took a photo of my door handle because paranoia had become a form of documentation. I stepped into the hall, walked to the stairs, and kept my eyes up on the ceiling tiles, without meaning to, searching for anything crooked, any dust line disturbed. Nothing obvious. The stairwell smelled like cleaner and warm air. People were talking somewhere below. It almost made me want to cry from relief. I bought 2 bottles of water and a granola bar because I didn't trust myself to make a second trip later. I came back up the stairs, the plastic bottles cold against my palms, and I noticed something small halfway down the hall. My door was not fully closed. It wasn't wide open. It wasn't dramatic. It was cracked, maybe half an inch, like it hadn't latched. The thin wedge of darkness at the seam made my vision sharpen. My first thought was I must have failed to pull it shut. My second thought was that I never failed to pull it shut anymore. I stopped walking. I listened. No voices. No movement. Just the fluorescent hum and a distant elevator cable settling. The air in the hallway felt warmer near my door, like a room had been breathed in. I approached slowly, the way you approach a sleeping animal you don't want to wake. The crack didn't widen. It didn't shift. My deadbolt should have prevented the door from opening at all, even a fraction, unless I'd never thrown it. But I had. I remembered the click. I remembered the weight of it. I reached out and touched the handle with one fingertip. Cold metal. No vibration. I nudged the door inward, with my shoulder just enough to test resistance. It swung open smoothly, silently, as if it had been waiting for me to return and finish the motion. The deadbolt was not engaged. I stared at the bolt slot, then at the lock itself, and felt my mouth go dry. I stepped inside and immediately looked at the chair I'd placed under the handle. It had been moved. Not far, but shifted just enough to prove a human decision. My backpack was still on the bed where I left it, but the zipper tab was turned the other direction like someone had brushed it. The bathroom light, which I was sure I'd switched off, was on. A thin line of steam fogged the mirror, faint enough that it could have been left over from a shower, except I hadn't showered. The room smelled subtly of soap. I stood in the doorway and didn't move, because every instinct told me not to commit my body to a space I didn't control. I scanned corners, under the bed, closet door. Nothing obvious. Then I saw my phone on the nightstand. It wasn't where I left it. I always left it charging, on the desk. Now it sat face up, on the nightstand, charging cable unplugged, screen dark. That was a small violation, but it was intimate, like someone had wanted my phone closer to my bed, closer to my sleep. I grabbed it and woke it. No missed calls, no texts, but the time display hit me like a slap. 313. It was 1046A. In real time. The hallway noise and daylight through the window proved it. Yet my phone insisted it was 313 for a full 2 seconds before it corrected itself to the right time, like a glitch that wanted to remind me who owned the pattern. I checked the door lock again. The deadbolt turned freely, too freely, like it had been disengaged and re-engaged enough times, recently, that the mechanism was warmed up. I walked to the peephole and lifted the little cover. The hallway was empty. Then my eyes dropped to the carpet near the threshold, and my stomach turned cold. A faint, dusty outline of a footprint, not wet this time, but pressed into the carpet pile, like someone had stood there for a while, and then stepped away. Bare toe marks, just barely visible in the fibers. In the middle of the footprint sat something white, a plastic fork clean, placed upright, with its tines resting against the base of the door like a tiny ladder. I should have called campus police immediately. I should have stepped back into the hallway and left the room untouched. But the room already felt touched, already felt organized, and panic makes you want to regain control by checking everything. I opened my backpack. My documents were there. Screenshots, printed logs, the photo of the tape, my charger, my laptop. But one item had been added. A folded receipt, slipped the same kind the delivery driver had shoved under my door, now tucked neatly into my notebook like a bookmark. I unfolded it with shaking fingers. The total still read $0. Lynn. The signature line still had the tiny fork drawn at the end. Underneath, in neat block letters, one sentence had been written: "You came back." I felt my throat tighten. I hadn't come back from anything significant. I'd gone to buy water. Unless the sentence was about something else, unless it was about returning to awareness, returning to fear, returning to the game. I heard a soft click behind me, and my entire body seized. The bathroom door, which had been slightly ajar, swung fully closed on its own, the latch settling with a gentle finality. The sound was small, but decisive. I turned slowly and stared at that door like it might open again. It didn't. My phone buzzed once and I saw a new facilities alert. Door event detected guest room. Timestamp 313A. Again, I looked at my phone clock. Ilang Sichi. The alert was stamped hours in the past, as if the system wanted to pin reality to that one time. I called campus police anyway, voice tight, and told the dispatcher my door had been open, my deadbolt disengaged, items moved, and there was evidence someone had been inside. When the officer arrived, he checked the lock and frowned. "This deadbolt doesn't self-release," he said, like he was talking to himself. He asked if anyone had a spare key. I said no. He asked if I could have left it unlocked. I didn't answer, because answering would mean negotiating with doubt, and doubt is exactly what whoever was doing this fed on. He took photos of the footprint outline and the fork. He collected the receipt slip. Then he asked to see my door's access, logs. Housing printed them for him at the front desk. We stood there looking at the paper, while the lobby TV played a daytime talk show at high volume, bright and absurd. According to the log, my guest room door had been opened at 313A. By my credential, then closed, then opened again at 313A. By staff, master, then closed. 2 entries, same minute, same timestamp, like the system couldn't decide which story to file. The officer's jaw tightened. "You were asleep at 313, he said. I nodded. "Then you didn't open it," he replied, and his voice sounded like he wished the sentence could make it true. We went back upstairs, and as he stood in my doorway scanning the room, his radio crackled with a dispatch note. No additional units. Break staffing. The building, hearing that through the vents, the way it seemed to hear everything, responded with a soft elevator ding somewhere below clean and punctual. The officer told me to pack again, and this time he didn't say, "if you want." He said, "We're moving you to a hotel." I wanted to believe that would end it. I wanted to believe distance mattered. I stuffed clothes into my backpack while he watched the hallway, and when I grabbed my pillow, the fork on the floor shifted slightly, not sliding, just turning a fraction, as if someone unseen had nudged it with a toe. The officer didn't see it, or pretended not to. When I zipped my bag, my phone buzzed with a final text from the unknown number. Calm as a status update. Unlocked is easier. I stepped into the hallway and pulled the door shut behind me, and in the crack before it latched, I thought I saw a shadow inside my room. Just for a second, standing where my bed was, facing the door like it was watching me leave. Then the latch clicked, and the room sealed itself again, holding whatever story it wanted to keep when no one was looking. The last place I expected the pattern to follow me was a bathroom full of other people, because crowds are supposed to dilute danger, but isolation doesn't require emptiness. It just requires you to be unseen. The hotel campus police moved me to was the kind near highways that smells like carpet shampoo and old coffee, a place built for short stays and forgettable nights. It should have felt like a hard reset. No dorm keycards, no ceiling tiles I recognized, no campus rosters. The officer walked me to my room, waited while I checked the closet and the bathroom like a ritual, then told me to keep the chain latched and call if anything happened. When his footsteps faded down the hall, the hotel felt too quiet in a different way, the way anonymous buildings feel when you realize no one knows your name unless you tell them. I tried to sleep anyway. I woke at 3:12 a.m., with my heart racing before any noise, before any knock, like my body had internalized the schedule. At 3:13, the ice machine in the hallway outside clicked on a mechanical churn that sounded close enough to be footsteps if you weren't careful. I stared at the ceiling and waited for the rest. Nothing came. The absence felt almost mocking, like the pattern could choose not to perform if it wanted to remind me it was in control. By morning, exhaustion had sanded my fear into something dull and practical. I needed a shower. I needed to feel clean. I told myself a hotel bathroom was safer because it had one door and no communal echoes, and for a few hours that was true. Then housing called and told me I had to come back to campus the next day to sign paperwork related to my temporary relocation and to retrieve any remaining property from the guest room. Sign paperwork. The word made my stomach tighten. I told them I wasn't signing anything alone. They said an RD would be present. I didn't trust that, but I needed my things, and I needed closure the way a drowning person needs a ledge. When I returned to campus the next afternoon, I didn't go back to the old dorm or even the guest dorm. Housing met me in an administrative building with bright lights and glass walls and a steady stream of staff. And for the first time in days, I felt like I was standing in a place that belonged to the day, not to that recurring minute at night. The RD was there, polite, professional, asking me to walk them through the timeline like this was a customer service issue. I handed over printouts. I showed screenshots. I explained the access logs, the forged escort, the ceiling nest, the forks, the tape. The RD listened and nodded and wrote notes, and when I paused, they said, "We take safety seriously with the same tone people use when they're reading from a script." At the end, they slid a form across the table and pointed to the signature line. I felt my mouth go dry. The line was blank. No fork, no scribble, just an empty space, waiting. "I'm not signing without my own copy," I said, and the RD smiled too widely and said of course. They photocopied the form and handed me 2 copies. The paper was warm from the machine. I signed both careful and watched the RD sign as well. For a moment the act felt normal, like ink could anchor reality. Then the RD gathered my documents and said I could use the restroom down the hall before leaving, because the administrative building was a bit of a walk from parking, and it was cold outside. That suggestion felt harmless. That's why it worked. The restroom was a single occupancy bathroom, with a lock, not communal, tucked behind a door, labeled staff and visitors. I went in, locked it, and washed my hands longer than necessary because the warm water felt like a reset. The mirror above the sink was large and clean, and fluorescent lights made everything sharp. I looked at my own face, and tried to see a person who was still in control of her life. Then I noticed the mirror was slightly misaligned. Not obvious, just a tiny tilt at the bottom right corner where it met the wall. A single screw head there looked newer than the others, shinier, like it had been replaced. My stomach tightened. I told myself I was projecting that I'd started seeing threats in hardware. I leaned in anyway, close enough that my breath fogged the glass. In the mirror behind my shoulder, I saw the narrow gap between the mirror frame and the wall tile. And in that gap was darkness deeper than a normal shadow. Something in that darkness shifted. A tiny flicker, like an eyelid. I froze so hard my hands went numb. I didn't turn around immediately because turning around is how you confirm you're alone or not alone. And in that half second my brain tried to bargain. Maybe it's a screw hole, maybe it's a vent gap, maybe it's nothing. Then I saw it again, clearer. A pale crescent shape in the dark, the curve of an eye reflecting fluorescent light. Someone was looking at me through a gap behind the mirror. My throat closed. I stepped back, slowly keeping my eyes on the mirror, as if breaking eye contact would make it lunge. The eye didn't blink. It stayed fixed, patient. My skin crawled with the realization that this wasn't a person standing in the bathroom with me. This was someone in the wall, in the space behind the mirror, watching through a deliberately loosened frame. The pattern didn't need the dorm. It needed access, and access existed anywhere. There were maintenance gaps and keys, and people who assumed privacy because a sign said restroom. I reached for my phone, and my fingers trembled so badly I almost dropped it. I didn't try to film because I'd learned filming invited glitches. Instead, I turned on the flashlight function and aimed it directly at the mirror's edge. The beam hit the frame, and the darkness behind it flinched, moved back slightly, like whatever was watching didn't like being lit. Then from behind the mirror, a soft scrape sounded metal against tile, like a hand adjusting the frame. The eye vanished. The gap darkened again, empty looking now, and the mirror settled a fraction tighter against the wall as if someone had pulled it flush to hide evidence. My pulse hammered. I backed toward the bathroom door and yanked it open. Stepping into the hallway like air mattered more than dignity. The corridor outside was empty for a second. Then a staff member rounded a corner, carrying a stack of folders, glanced at me and smiled politely. I wanted to grab them and say someone is in the wall, but my voice wouldn't work. I walked fast back to the housing office and told the RD, someone was behind the mirror in your restroom. The RD stared at me, expression tightening, and said, "That's not possible." The exact phrase I'd heard in a dozen forms. I insisted. 2 staff members followed me back, keys jangling, and opened the restroom. The mirror looked perfect now, flush aligned, no visible gap. The screws were all identical. The shiny one I'd noticed looked dull, like the rest. I felt like my brain had been edited. One staff member tapped the mirror frame lightly. Hollow sound. No response. The RD asked gently if I'd been sleeping. I wanted to scream. Instead I asked, "Can you remove it?" They hesitated, then said maintenance would have to do that. "Call maintenance," I said. The RD said maintenance was unavailable because of break staffing. The same excuse, different building. I stood there staring at the mirror until the staff started to look uncomfortable, and then I did the only thing I could do to create a witness. I walked into the restroom again and locked the door from the inside while they stood outside. I pressed my ear to the wall beside the mirror and held my breath. For a long moment, nothing. Then, very softly, I heard a sound on the other side of the tile. A slow inhale, then an exhale, close enough that it made the wall feel thin. I stepped back and looked at the mirror. In its surface, over my shoulder, a faint smudge appeared near the frame, like a fingerprint on the glass from the inside. The smudge slid downward a fraction, as if someone behind the mirror had placed their hand there and then slowly pulled it away. I unlocked the door and stepped out, shaking, and the staff stared at my face, and finally stopped smiling politely. The RD said they would escalate, and asked me to wait in the lobby. I sat under bright lights with other students filling out forms and talking about winter plans, and I felt more alone than I had in the empty dorm because my fear had nowhere to belong in a normal room. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. 1 message. Eyes are easy. A second message followed immediately. Mirrors are better. I stood up so fast. The chair legs scraped tile, and several people looked at me. I didn't care. I walked out of the building without waiting for the RD because I finally understood what my RA meant. It didn't follow people. It followed spaces. It followed the places you assume are private because everyone agrees they are. That night in the hotel, I latched the chain and covered the peephole and taped a towel along the bottom of the door like a seal. Ridiculous and desperate. A tre dois prazicha. I woke again, heart already racing. At 3:13, a knock came not from the hall, not from the door, but from inside the bathroom wall, beside the mirror, in my hotel room. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. Polite, patient, perfectly timed as if someone on the other side had learned exactly how to tell me, in the only language that mattered now, that changing buildings would never be enough if the world itself had more hidden routes than I could lock. In a dorm, you can tell yourself you're alone, because the hall is empty and the doors are closed. But out in daylight in a building full of people, you start to realize the real terror is not being alone at all. It's being surrounded by strangers, and still having no way to tell who belongs. After the taps came from inside my hotel bathroom wall, at exactly 3:13, I stopped trusting new places as a solution, and started treating my life like a moving perimeter. I slept with the lights on. I kept my phone in my hand like it was a lifeline, and I flinched every time a door latch clicked in a hallway that wasn't mine. The next morning, campus police told me they needed to do a controlled retrieval of any remaining items from my original dorm, and to finalize an incident report with housing, and they said the safest way was to meet at a public office near noon, when staff were present and cameras were active. Public, bright, busy, those were supposed to be protective weren't. I showed up with my backpack, my folder of screenshots, and the hollow feeling that the pattern would find a way to turn crowds into camouflage. The housing office sat in a glass-walled building near the center of campus, with students coming and going, and staff behind counters, pretending everything was routine. I waited near a bench, watching reflections in the windows because mirrors had become an enemy, and that's when I noticed him. A man standing too still near the hallway that led to the restrooms. Not in a line, not looking at his phone, just waiting, like he had nowhere else to be. He wasn't wearing campus gear. No hoodie with a school logo, no lanyard, no backpack. He looked like a local work boots faded jacket, a knit cap pulled low, hands in pockets. At first that should have made him invisible, because campuses are always full of locals, delivery drivers, contractors, people cutting across the quad. But my body recognized him before my brain did the same way it recognized 3:13 before a clock confirmed it. He looked up, and when our eyes met, he smiled like he'd been expecting me. Not a polite stranger smile, a smile with familiarity. Then he turned and walked away at an unhurried pace, slipping behind a column and out of view, as if he didn't want to be caught lingering. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself I'd spent too many nights listening to taps and vents and elevators. Then my phone buzzed with a text from the unknown number. "You look better in daylight." My stomach dropped so hard my knees went weak. I hadn't said anything out loud. I hadn't even moved. I walked to the nearest staff member and asked if campus police were on their way. She said yes, and she said it gently, like she was talking to someone fragile. While I waited, I tried to stay in the center of the room where people could see me. That's the lie you want to believe. Visibility equals safety. 10 minutes later, the same man walked back through the lobby, this time carrying a coffee cup. He wasn't in a hurry. He didn't glance around, like he was lost. He moved like he knew the building's routine, like he knew which camera angles mattered and which didn't. He passed behind me, close enough that I caught the smell of stale smoke and detergent, and he murmured, without turning his head, "You should stop moving rooms. It makes you obvious." The words were soft delivered, like advice between acquaintances. I spun, but he was already several steps away, blending into a small cluster of students. If I pointed, it would look like I was accusing a random man in a public building. That's how you get isolated in a crowd. Your fear becomes the thing people watch, instead of the threat. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number, local, is easier. My pulse hammered. I walked to the counter and asked the staffer if there were any contractors scheduled in the building. She glanced at a calendar and said, not that she knew of. Campus police arrived, and I immediately told them about the man. I described him the work boots, the knit cap, the way he spoke, like he knew I'd moved rooms. One officer scanned the lobby, eyes narrowing, but the man was gone. The officer asked if he threatened me. I said he didn't need to. The officer asked if I wanted to file it as harassment. I said yes. I said I wanted his face on record. Housing staff led us to a small conference room with glass walls. The officer took my statement while the RD sat with a clipboard and that same practice concern. Every few minutes, the RD's phone chimed, and each time they looked at the screen too quickly, like they were waiting for instructions. I felt sick, with suspicion I couldn't prove. When my statement was done, the officer said we'd do the retrieval next. He and his partner would escort me to the old dorm we'd entered together, collect my things, and leave. Controlled. Simple, he added, as if it would soothe me. We'll keep you in our sight. I nodded, but the words in our sight sounded like a joke, because sight hadn't been the problem. Access had. We walked outside into the quad, where snow had melted into grey slush around sidewalks. Students passed us laughing, carrying backpacks, talking about winter plans. The officer's presence made me feel briefly anchored in normal procedure. Then, near the edge of the quad, by a bus stop, I saw the local again. Same jacket, same cap. He stood under the shelter, like he'd been waiting for a bus that never came. As we approached, he lifted his coffee cup in a small, almost friendly salute and said loud enough for the officers to hear, "Hey, you okay?" The officer's head snapped toward him. He smiled wider. "Just checking," he said, tone casual. She looked upset back there. He was performing concern. He was making himself look like a good Samaritan. One officer asked him for ID. The man didn't flinch. He reached into his pocket and produced a wallet, slow and compliant. He handed over a card. The officer glanced at it, then frowned slightly, like the information didn't match expectations. "You live around here?" the officer asked. "Yeah," the man said, easily. "Tauni. I do odd jobs. Been around campus a long time." He looked at me. "Seen a lot of kids get scared of old buildings," he added, like he was the expert and I was the naive one. The officer asked why he was in the admin building earlier. The man shrugged. "Restroom," he said, and the word hit me like a punch. He watched my reaction with calm interest, as if confirming that he'd landed the needle. The officer handed the ID back and told him to keep his distance. The man nodded, still smiling, and took a slow sip of coffee as we walked away. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. He doesn't need a badge. I tried to keep my breathing steady. The officers didn't see the text. They only saw me tighten. "You know him?" one asked. "No," I said, and the truth felt useless. We reached the old dorm building after a short drive, and the sight of it made my skin crawl. Even in daylight, it looked like a sealed concrete lung. Too many identical windows, too many blind spots. The officers parked near the entrance. Snow around the emergency exits was undisturbed, clean white in places where no one had walked in days. That should have been comforting. Instead, it felt staged, like a set, waiting for actors. We went inside. The lobby was empty, lights dimmed. A radiator hissed. The officers swiped their credentials and the door clicked open like it recognized them, like it was happy to see authority because authority was predictable. I told myself to stay close, to keep my eyes on their uniforms, to let their presence pull me forward. The elevator was the wrong choice, so we took the stairs. Halfway up, I heard a faint scrape above us, through the stairwell ceiling, soft like fabric on plywood. One officer paused and listened. "Probably settling," he muttered, but his voice wasn't confident. We reached my floor. The hallway looked the same as it always had. Too long, too quiet, doors, like shut mouths. As we approached my room, I felt my chest tighten with the familiar expectation of a chirp, a click, a denial tone. The officer swiped his keycard. Accepted. The lock clicked. Before he even turned the handle, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Watch your back. I didn't have time to show the officer. The door swung open. My room looked Normal at first glance, which was the most disturbing thing it could have done. Bed, desk, chair, quiet. Then the officer's flashlight beam caught something on the carpet near the closet, a strip of painter's tape folded into a neat square. He picked it up carefully, like evidence. On it in neat black marker were 3 words. "You brought them." The officer stared at it, jaw tightening. His radio crackled with dispatch chatter, and for a second the crackle sounded like laughter, if you listened wrong. We collected my remaining items quickly. The officers kept scanning corners. I kept expecting to hear tapping from inside the wall, but instead I heard something worse. The normal sounds of the building continuing, as if nothing was wrong, as if the building wanted to prove it could hide horror under routine. When we stepped back into the hallway, I saw the local at the far end, near the stairwell door. He hadn't followed us inside visibly. He was simply there, as if the building produced him from a closet when needed. He raised his hand in a small wave and called, "Told you moving rooms makes you obvious." The officers shouted at him to stop and approached fast. The man didn't run. He turned and pushed open the stairwell door with one hand like he knew it wasn't locked. The door's hinge sighed, and he slipped through. One officer ran after him. The other stayed with me, guiding me back toward the elevator lobby. The stairwell door slammed shut behind the pursuing officer, and the sound echoed down the hall like a punctuation mark. My phone buzzed one more time and my blood ran cold when I read it. He's not a student. He's never been a student. That wasn't new information. The new information was the message that followed immediately after he's staff when he needs to be. From somewhere above us, in the ceiling, a slow scrape moved away, tracking the officer's pursuit, staying overhead, like a shadow that didn't need light. I realized then that the local wasn't a separate threat at all. He was the daytime face of the same access problem. The same calm voice, the same procedural tone, the same insistence that I was the one making it weird. The officer with me said, "We'll get him," but his voice sounded thin in that hallway. The elevator dinged softly, and even though it was midday, the sterile light spilled out like it always did, bright and wrong. The doors opened. The car was empty. On the floor of the elevator, perfectly centered, was a brown paper coffee cup lid, clean with a tiny plastic fork balanced on top like a flag. The officer stared at it. I stared at it. And in the silence between us, my phone buzzed one last time for the day. Daylight doesn't lock doors. The emergency exit alarm is supposed to mean one simple thing: a door opened that shouldn't have and someone left who shouldn't be there. But in that dorm, alarms never meant what they were designed to mean. After the local slipped through the stairwell door like it recognized him, one officer chased and the other kept me moving, because procedure demands separation. One unit pursues, one unit protects. We didn't get far. Halfway down the hall toward the elevator lobby, a harsh electronic screech erupted from the far end of the corridor, loud enough to make my teeth ache. The emergency exit alarm. It wasn't the softer beep-beep of a propped door. It was the full panic-making siren that says "Fire door open." The officer swore and keyed his radio. "Alarm on 3, he said. "Check exits." The sound bounced off concrete and closed doors and turned the hallway into a megaphone. In a dorm full of students, an alarm creates chaos. In an empty dorm, it creates isolation, because it announces your location to whoever is hiding and forces you to make decisions while your nerves are being shaken. The officer told me to stay by the elevator lobby in view of the camera, and he ran toward the alarm. I watched his flashlight beam jitter along the floor as he moved, then disappear around the corner. The elevator doors stood closed, silent, as if the building wanted to pretend it wasn't part of this. My phone buzzed. Facilities alert. Emergency exit opened. Floor 3, east. Timestamp 313p. I looked at my lock screen clock. Sen E.R. 1 minute ahead again, like the building was always announcing the punchline before the joke landed. The alarm continued, shrill and relentless. I stayed put because I'd learned the danger of following, but my body wanted to run towards sound because sound feels like certainty. The elevator dinged and opened empty, sterile light, spilling out. The car's panel flashed service mode. My stomach tightened. Service mode meant keys. It meant access. It meant a system choosing to obey something other than me. I backed away from the open elevator like it was a mouth. In the hallway, doors remained closed. No one emerged. No one shouted. No one reacted because there was no one else. That was the worst part. Alarms are meant to summon witnesses. In an empty building, they summon only you. Over the siren, I heard a different sound. The soft click of a stairwell door opening, then closing. Not the alarmed door, but the one nearer to me. I turned and saw the officer who had chased the local returning, breathing hard. "He's gone," he said. "Stairwell leads to basement and out. Didn't see him." The alarm screamed. The officer's eyes narrowed. "That door should leave tracks," he muttered, glancing toward the exit side of the building where snow should have shown footprints. He radioed his partner. No reply over the siren. "We've got an emergency exit alarm," he said into the radio anyway. "Do you see anyone leaving?" Still no reply. He grabbed my elbow and moved us away from the elevator toward the stairwell, landing where the sound was slightly less violent. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Nobody left. The sentence landed like ice in my stomach because it wasn't a threat. It was a correction, like the voice was grading my understanding. We reached the corner where the alarm was loudest and saw the emergency exit door, a heavy metal door with a push bar and a bright red sign. The siren box above it flashed. The officer approached, carefully scanning the floor. No wet prints. No shoe marks. No scuffing. The push bar sat level. The door looked closed, yet the siren screamed as if it were wide open. The officer pressed the bar slightly. The door didn't budge. He tried again, harder. Still sealed. He swore and checked the alarm box, then looked up at the doorframe. "This alarm triggers when the magnetic contact breaks," he said, half to me, half to himself. "Door opens, contact separates." He shined his flashlight along the top edge. The contact sensor looked intact. The door hadn't moved, yet the alarm insisted it had. Over the siren, a faint tapping started somewhere behind us. 3 taps pause. 3 taps soft enough that it could have been my imagination, except the officer's head snapped toward it too. The tapping came from the wall near the lounge, the same area where we found the ceiling nest. The officer's expression tightened. "Stay here," he told me, and he stepped toward the lounge door, flashlight up. The tapping stopped immediately like it was bait, and he refused to bite. The alarm continued relentless. The officer turned back to the exit door and radioed dispatch. Again, louder. A reply finally crackled through partner checking. "East exit now. No one seen. Door appears. Closed alarm. Active." 2 exits. Same situation. Closed doors. Active alarms. No one leaving. That's when the building showed its hand. The siren cut off abruptly, not fading, not winding down, just silent like someone flipped a switch. The flashing light stopped. The hallway felt suddenly too quiet, as if the building had been using the alarm to cover something else. The officer's radio crackled with his partner's voice. Exit alarm stopped. Door never opened. The officer exhaled sharply. Then why he began and didn't finish, because at that moment my phone buzzed with a new access log alert. The officer's system had pushed to his device. Master access used. Floor 3. Utility closet. Timestamp. 313P. M. Again. Always 3. 1-3. The utility closet was the one across from my old room. The janitor closet that had opened smoothly for the fake security guard. The officer's eyes went hard. "Back to your room," he said, and his tone was no longer comforting. It was tactical. We moved fast down the hall. As we approached, we saw the closet door across from my room was cracked open an inch. The officer raised his flashlight and radioed his partner to converge. He nudged the closet door open with his boot. Inside was darkness and the smell of bleach. The shelves held supplies. The mop bucket sat still. It looked normal until the flashlight beam hit the back wall where the ceiling access panel was. The panel was open. The ladder inside was down. Dust drifted in the beam like smoke. The officer stared up into that black rectangle. and for a second he didn't move, because every instinct told him this was the route. This was the place the crawler wanted opened wider. Then from above the opening, something dropped. Not a person. A strip of painter's tape fluttered down like a leaf and landed at the officer's feet. He bent, picked it up, and unfolded it with gloved fingers. On it was my name printed in neat block letters, and beneath it, "Alarms are for cover." The officer's jaw clenched. Back he ordered, and he closed the closet door hard, as if shutting it could undo what was above. At the end of the hall his partner arrived, breathless flashlight sweeping. "Exit door never opened," the partner said. "Snow outside is untouched." He held up his own phone, showing a photo taken of the emergency exit on the building's exterior. Clean white snow, no footprints, no drag marks, nothing. "Then why did it alarm?" he asked, and the question hung there like a challenge. The building answered in the only language it had been using all week. From my room door behind us, the lock reader chirped. A clean acceptance tone. The latch clicked. Both officers spun. My door, which I had not touched, eased inward half an inch, and stopped like someone inside, pushed it just enough to prove they could. The hallway light spilled into my room. In that thin opening, a shadow shifted then retreated like something had been standing just behind the door, waiting for the alarm to draw everyone away. The officers rushed forward, yanked the door open, and swept my room with flashlights. Empty. Closet closed. Underbed empty. Bathroom empty. Normal furniture. Normal silence. Then one officer stepped toward my desk and stopped. On the desk, perfectly centered, sat a small red emergency exit push bar, cover the kind that flips up and triggers alarms if disturbed. It didn't belong in my room. It belonged on a door. Beside it was a plastic fork, tines pressed into the cover as if someone had used it to pry. The officer picked up the cover and turned it over. On the back was a thin smear of black residue like tape adhesive, and a tiny handwritten note in neat marker, "Nobody left." The officers stared at it, and for the first time neither tried to explain it away. One officer quietly said, "It can trigger the alarm without opening the door." The partner nodded slowly, understanding settling like a bruise. Cover off contact. Broken alarm screams. Everyone runs. Cameras. Look at exits, he said, and his voice sounded sick. Meanwhile, the route opened somewhere else. Exactly. The alarm wasn't a mistake. It was a diversion. The building didn't need to open an emergency exit to make people believe someone left. It only needed to make the system scream. My phone buzzed. "Unknown number, you ran where I wanted. Then another next time, open it yourself." The officers told me we were done. No more solo retrievals. No more temporary rooms. They would escalate to the university police department, not just campus patrol. They would demand maintenance, access audits, and sealed ceiling chases. They spoke in firm plans, but their eyes kept flicking upward, toward ceiling tiles, toward vents, toward places. Doors weren't. As we left the floor, I looked back once at the emergency exit door. It sat perfectly closed, calm and innocent, the way a liar looks when the story works. And in the silence after the siren, I could hear it again, faint through the vents, a slow drag in the ceiling, moving above the stairwell, tracking us as we descended, staying directly overhead, patient and quiet, like it didn't need alarms to follow anymore, because it had already learned the simplest truth in a crowded place. Isolation is not the absence of people, it's the absence of anyone who can see what's really moving. I learned what a squatter in the closet really meant on the day university police finally arrived with a maintenance supervisor, a housing director, and the exhausted look of people who'd realized the problem wasn't my imagination, it was. Axis. They said they needed one last controlled sweep of my original room, and the utility spaces around it not to comfort me, but to document conditions before they sealed the route. We went back in daylight again, but daylight didn't soften the building. It just made the long hallway look more honest about how little it cared. 2 officers went in first, while I stood in the hall with the housing director, watching their flashlights sweep corners like they expected the room to blink. Nothing obvious, one officer called, and his voice didn't sound relieved. The maintenance supervisor opened my closet and immediately went still. It wasn't a dramatic gasp. It was the quiet, involuntary pause of a person whose brain just noticed a detail it can't unsee. The back wall of my closet didn't look like drywall. It looked like a panel. Slightly different texture, slightly different paint sheen. A seam so thin you'd miss it, unless you were trained to hunt for seams. The supervisor ran his knuckles along the edge. Hollow. Not the dead flat thud of a normal wall. This sounded like a lid over a cavity. "This isn't original," he muttered, almost offended, like the building had lied to him professionally. One officer leaned in light-angled low and found the smallest scratch marks near the seam, the kind that appear when something is opened and closed over and over by someone who doesn't care about leaving it pretty. The housing director tried to laugh it off. Old dorms have quirks, but the officer didn't smile. He nodded once at the supervisor. "Open it," he said. The supervisor hesitated, like he was waiting for a work order to appear out of thin air. Then he pulled a tool from his belt and wedged it into the seam. The panel didn't resist like a wall. It resisted like a door. When it finally gave a narrow gap, opened, and a smell slipped out, hot dust, stale sweat, old fabric, and that faint sweet note I'd smelled in the ceiling spaces before, like dried energy drink and damp cardboard. The officer's flashlight slid into the gap and caught a hidden cavity behind my closet, not large enough for comfort, but large enough for a person to crouch and move. Cardboard covered the floor like makeshift insulation. A flattened dining tray sat upside down like a table. There were stacks of plastic forks, more than I'd ever seen in one place, arranged almost neatly, like someone had collected them the way other people collect proof. A crumpled sleeping bag lay pushed back into the shadows, and beside it, a half-empty water bottle with condensation still clinging inside like it had been held recently. The officer breathed out once slow and said flatly, "This is a living space." The housing director's face went grey. The supervisor whispered, "How is this even?" and stopped because inside the cavity something shifted. Not pipes. Not settling. A soft, deliberate flex of cardboard under weight. The flashlight beam snapped deeper, and for half a second it caught a face pale, tucked back in darkness. Eyes, reflecting like glass. The officer shouted stop and lunged forward, but the opening was too narrow for his shoulders. The person inside didn't bolt like a panicked intruder. They retreated like someone following a route they'd walked 100 times. A rapid scrape traveled sideways behind the studs, moving away from the light, away from the closet, away from the idea of being caught. One officer ran into the hallway, barking into his radio to seal stairwells and check utility closets, and his voice echoed down the empty corridor like a warning no one else could hear. The building answered the way it always did. My phone buzzed with a facilities alert that made my stomach drop before I even read it. Unauthorized closet panel opened. Timestamp 313 p.m. I looked at the wall clock by the elevator lobby. San E A. 1 minute ahead again, like the building was filing the paperwork before the moment finished happening. Inside my room, the supervisor tried to swing the panel closed, but it wouldn't seat. Something had been wedged into the latch from inside. Thin, resilient, almost insulting. The officer reached in and yanked it free. A fork. The prongs had been used like a tiny brace, to keep the panel from locking. The same simple, stupid object turned into a tool just by being placed correctly. On the handle, in neat black marker, was one word. Home. The officer held it up like evidence, and like an accusation. "He's been in and out," he said, voice tight, "and he wants us to know it." Backup arrived, and suddenly the room filled with procedure, photos, evidence, bags, gloved hands measuring the seam, the supervisor muttering about unauthorized modifications and impossible routes. They found more than I wanted to know, but less than I needed. Wrappers, a folded campus map with corridors marked a strip of painter's tape with multiple room numbers written in the same careful handwriting, including mine and the guest room. I'd been placed in like my relocation had been a joke. Someone tracked for sport. Across the hall, the utility closet door that had always felt wrong was already cracked open, as if it had never been fully closed in the first place. Inside the ceiling access panel was a jar ladder down, dust freshly disturbed. The route hadn't started in my closet. My closet was simply one of the doors into it. One officer sealed the panel with thick, red tape, while another photographed it, and the gesture looked authoritative until you remembered how easily tape had been used against me. For weeks, labels, warnings, instructions, names, all of it. Written as if the building's hidden occupant understood that. Official-looking markings are a kind of magic. The housing director said something about communications and privacy, and not alarming returning residents. And the lead officer stared at him and said, "Someone has been living inside your walls." The housing director didn't answer. He didn't deny it. He just looked away like the sentence was too expensive to hold. When they finally escorted me out for the last time, I didn't look back at my room. I looked up at the ceiling tiles above the hallway instead, because I could feel the idea of someone above me, like pressure. One tile, near my closet area, sat slightly crooked, as if it had been pressed down to listen. As I passed beneath it, it made the faintest creak, almost like a knuckle tap, translated into architecture. Outside, the snow was bright and indifferent. My phone buzzed once more, as the lobby doors closed behind me. Unknown number. You called it a closet. I called it a door. The Phrogging Nightmare wasn't the discovery that someone could live inside a dorm without being seen. It was the realization that the dorm had been training me for weeks to accept the idea that my private spaces were negotiable. After the closet panel and the word home, university police moved fast in public and slow in reality. They sealed access points. They audited master keys. They issued stern memos. And then they told me the case was under investigation and advised me not to post about it online. Housing offered me a different building for spring semester and said with the same calm tone they used for roommate disputes that sometimes unhoused individuals seek shelter in large facilities. They turned a living route into a social issue and tried to flatten it into a headline that wouldn't embarrass anyone. I left campus for winter break and didn't come back. For a while, away from concrete corridors and fluorescent hum, my body started to unclench. I stayed with family, then took a sublease off campus, near a grocery store, and a busy road somewhere normal, somewhere that didn't have secret maintenance chases by design. I told myself the pattern belonged to the dorm. I told myself the time 313 was a scar the building had carved into me, not a real appointment in the universe. And for a couple of weeks, nothing happened. No alerts, no forks, no painter's tape. I slept through the night like a person again. That's the part no one believes. When you tell a story like this later, the calm comes back and you start to feel embarrassed for ever thinking walls could have intentions. Then, one evening, I came home to my sublease and found my bedroom door slightly ajar, not wide open, not dramatic, half an inch. Just enough to show the dark seam of a room that had breathed while I was gone. I stood in the hallway listening, waiting for the old building's fluorescent hum, but the apartment was silent, except for traffic outside. I told myself it was the HVAC pressure. I told myself it was a draft. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. My bed was made differently than I'd left it. One corner tucked tighter, the blanket pulled flat like a hotel. On my dresser sat a plastic fork clean placed beside my keys, as if it belonged in the category of daily essentials. My mouth went dry. I didn't touch it. I backed out and called the non-emergency line because that's what you do when you're trying to behave like a sane person. The responding officer checked windows, checked the lock, asked if I'd left a key out. I said no. He asked if I had roommates. I said no. He asked if I'd had issues at the university. I hesitated, because saying yes felt like handing my credibility over to someone who didn't know what to do with it. I told him anyway briefly, the safest version dorm overbreak intruder access logs investigation. He nodded politely the way people nod at stories they can't file correctly. He took a report, advised me to change locks, and left. I stared at the fork until my eyes blurred. Then I did the only thing that felt like control. I threw it away and scrubbed my hands like the plastic could contaminate me through sight. That night I slept with a chair under my doorknob and my phone on my chest. At 3:02 I woke without a sound waking me. At 3:13 there was a soft tap from inside my closet wall. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, polite, patient, exactly like the dorm. My throat closed so hard, it hurt. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I listened until the tapping stopped, and when it stopped, the silence felt worse, because silence means relocation. The next day I called the university detective, assigned to my case the one name I'd been given and told to trust. He sounded tired and annoyed when he answered as if my fear was an inconvenience on his schedule. I told him it followed me. He paused, then said carefully, "There is no indication of continued threat outside campus facilities." His sentence was too rehearsed, too smooth, like he was reading a line that had been written to close a file. I asked if they had a suspect. He said no. I asked if they had found anyone in the ceiling routes. He said they had sealed access points. I asked if they had recovered master keys. He said they had updated protocols. He never said the word person. He never said the word living. He never said the word phrogging, because phrogging is what you call it when a stranger inhabits your space while you're still inhabiting it, when your life becomes a shared property and you're the last one informed. I hung up and realized I didn't even know whether the detective was protecting me or protecting the university, and that uncertainty was its own kind of invasion. That evening, I decided I needed proof that wouldn't vanish into a looping camera feed. I didn't set a trap the way people online fantasize about traps. I didn't want revenge. I wanted a witness. I invited 2 friends over to sit with me from midnight to 4, told them only that I'd been dealing with a stalker and needed company, and I asked them to keep their phones on and their eyes open. They came because they cared, and because they didn't understand, which was exactly what I wanted. Fresh eyes, not trained by fear. We sat in my living room with lights on, talking softly, pretending normal. At 3:12, I felt my body tighten. Anyway, at 3:13, the tapping came again, not from my closet this time, but from above the bathroom mirror. 3 taps, pause. 3 taps, like a polite knock from inside the wall. One of my friends laughed nervously and said, "Is that your neighbor?" And the question landed like a knife because it was so reasonable. The other friend stood up and walked toward the bathroom, frowning. "It's coming from inside there," she said, and her voice had shifted into the same tone campus police had used in the study lounge, the tone of someone who hears a sound that doesn't belong in normal. She leaned closer to the mirror and said, "Hello." The taps stopped immediately, as if they'd been waiting for acknowledgement. Then very softly, we heard a sound behind the wall, breathing close and steady. My friend stepped back, eyes wide. "Someone's in there," she whispered. In that moment, I felt a sick relief, so sharp it almost made me dizzy because for the first time it wasn't only my fear naming it. It was another person's senses confirming it. I grabbed my phone and called 911, and I put it on speaker so my friends could hear me report it, so the dispatcher's questions could become part of the room, part of the record. While we waited, we stood in the living room like refugees from our own bathroom, staring at the mirror as if it might open. 10 minutes later, the police arrived and searched the apartment, closet, attic access vents, the small maintenance panel behind the refrigerator. They found nothing obvious. The officer in charge looked at my bathroom mirror and said, "It's just a mirror, like saying it could make it true." I asked him to remove it. He hesitated, then said he could check behind it if I consented to property damage. I said yes. He loosened the screws and lifted the mirror slightly away from the wall, and as the edge separated, a folded strip of painter's tape dropped out from behind it, like a secret falling from a pocket. The officer caught it, unfolded it, and went quiet. On the tape, in neat black marker, was my apartment unit number, and beneath it, "Still here." My friend started crying, not screaming, just the silent panic tears of people who've realized a horror story is not a genre when you're standing inside it. The officer shined his flashlight into the narrow cavity behind the mirror. The space was small, not a hidden room, but there was enough void to see scuff marks on the inside surface, enough to see a thin smear of grime like fingers had been resting there. The officer's face changed. He didn't look amused anymore. He looked angry. He radioed for a supervisor and told me quietly to stay with my friends outside while they checked the building's service areas. We stood in the cold hallway, listening to doors open and close, listening to radios crackle. and for a moment I thought, this is it. They're going to find the person. They're going to name them and the spell will break. Then the elevator dinged down the hall, bright, sterile, punctual, and the building's hallway lights flickered once like a blink. The officers returned 20 minutes later and said they hadn't found anyone. The cavity behind the mirror didn't connect to a larger crawl space in any obvious way. The maintenance areas were locked. There were no signs of forced entry. And yet the tape had been there behind my mirror in handwriting that matched the dorm in the same careful block letters, with the same obsession with my room number, as if my identity could be reduced to a label on a door. One officer pulled me aside and said in a low voice that finally sounded honest, "This looks like someone with access to service routes." He didn't say how. He didn't say who. He didn't say the terrifying part out loud, that service routes exist in more places than dorms, and that someone who learns to live inside them doesn't need to break in like a criminal. They only need to appear where you least expect a human to fit. After the police left, my friends begged me to stay with them, and I did because I couldn't stand the thought of sleeping in my own bed while wondering if someone was listening through drywall like it was a headphone. A week later, I received an email from the university case office. Polished language, no names, no details, saying the investigation had not identified a perpetrator, and that they considered immediate risk mitigated due to sealing and protocol. Updates. The same bland confidence, the same desire to close the file. I wanted to reply with a photo of the painter's tape from behind my mirror, but I knew what would happen. It would become another attachment in a system that files human terror under administrative categories. Months passed. I moved again. I changed apartments. I stopped telling new landlords my full story, because I could see their faces calculate liability. I stopped using mirrors at night. I stopped leaving my phone out of reach. But the worst part of phrogging isn't the physical evidence. It's the way it permanently rewrites your relationship with home. Home becomes a space you rent from your own assumptions, and the rent is vigilance. On the last night I ever spent alone without a friend on standby, I woke at 3:12 a.m. without a sound. At 3:13, I heard 3 polite taps from inside the wall beside my closet. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. And then so softly it could have been my own breath, reflected back a voice through the drywall, said calm and familiar like it was. Offering customer service. You can keep moving, or you can open the door. I didn't open anything. I didn't speak. I just lay there in the dark, realizing the final truth that makes the whole thing a nightmare. The most terrifying part wasn't that someone had lived inside my dorm. It was that whoever it was had learned how to live inside the spaces people stop looking at. And once you know those spaces exist, you can never fully believe you're alone again.